Copper Ridge, Arizona, 1885. A crippled boy collapses in the dust outside Claire Dawson's failing general store, and the most dangerous rancher in the territory is watching every move she makes. Claire doesn't know that one act of kindness, a cup of water, a piece of cornbread, will drag her into a world of wealth, betrayal, and a frame-up so perfect it could destroy her life. When 50 head of cattle vanish and a forged letter appears in her handwriting, Claire has 12 hours before the man she's falling for exiles her forever. If you're ready for a story about second chances, betrayal, and frontier justice, stay until the end. Like this video and comment your city so I can see how far Claire's story travels. The Arizona sun beat down on Main Street like a hammer on an anvil, turning the dirt to powder and the air to something you could chew. Claire Dawson stood in the doorway of her general store, though calling it hers was generous, considering the bank owned more of it than she did, and watched the heat shimmer rise off the false-fronted buildings across the way. 3 years since Thomas died. 3 years of counting pennies, stretching flour, and smiling at customers who paid half in credit they'd never settle. The ledger on her counter told a story she didn't want to read. Red ink had a way of spreading like blood stains. She was wiping down the jars of hard candy, luxuries she stocked but rarely sold, when she heard the sound. A scraping, uneven rhythm, metal on wood, breathing that came too hard, too fast. Claire stepped into the furnace heat of midday and saw him. A boy. Maybe 12, maybe younger, hard to tell under the grime and the sharp angles of hunger. His left leg twisted at an angle God never intended, braced with leather straps and a crude iron brace that looked like it had been forged in someone's barn. He moved on crutches, each step a small war against gravity and pain, dragging that useless leg behind him like an anchor. He made it another 3 feet before he went down. Claire didn't think. She ran, skirts kicking up dust, and dropped to her knees beside him. His face was gray beneath the dirt, lips cracked and bleeding at the corners. When she touched his forehead, the heat coming off his skin had nothing to do with the sun. "Easy," she murmured, sliding an arm under his thin shoulders. "I've got you." He tried to speak, but his tongue stuck to the roof of his mouth. His eyes, dark and fierce even in their desperation, locked onto hers with something that looked like disbelief, as if kindness was a language he'd forgotten. "Can you stand if I help?" He managed a nod. Getting him upright was like lifting sun-baked wood, all edges and resistance. But Claire had hauled feed sacks and water barrels for 3 years. She was stronger than she looked. She got him through the door of the store and into the back room where she kept a cot for the nights when walking home felt like too much effort. She poured water from the pitcher on her washstand, held the cup to his lips. "Slow, just sips." He drank like a man dying in the desert, and she had to pull the cup back before he made himself sick. His eyes followed her every movement, wary, calculating. A boy who'd learned not to trust easy gestures. "When did you eat last?" He swallowed, winced. 2 days, maybe 3. Claire's heart clenched, but she kept her face calm. She went to the storefront, cut a thick slice of cornbread left over from her own breakfast, spread it with butter and a precious spoonful of honey. When she brought it back, his hand shook so badly he nearly dropped it. "What's your name?" He hesitated, then so quietly she almost missed it. "Eli." "I'm Claire. You're safe here, Eli." His laugh was bitter, older than his years. "Nowhere's safe for me." She wanted to argue, but the way he said it, flat, factual, made her bite her tongue. Instead, she dampened a cloth and wiped the worst of the dirt from his face. A handsome boy beneath the grime, strong features, eyes that held too much knowledge and not enough hope. "That leg giving you trouble?" "Always." "Can I look at the brace?" He tensed, but nodded. Claire knelt and examined the contraption holding his leg in some semblance of alignment. It was crude work, functional but punishing. The leather straps had rubbed his skin raw in a dozen places, and the metal framework was set at an angle that forced his hip to compensate, throwing his whole body out of balance. "Who made this?" "Ranch blacksmith. Did his best." "Your family run a ranch?" Something flickered in his eyes, part pride, part pain. "My father does." "He know you're here?" Eli's face closed like a shuttered window. He knows I can't do the things that matter, so it doesn't matter where I am. Claire sat back on her heels, studying this boy who'd clearly limped away from something, or someone. I don't believe that. You don't know him. I don't have to. I know that anybody who'd let a child go hungry. I'm not a child. The words came sharp, defensive. And he didn't let anything. I left. He probably hasn't even noticed. The front door opened, the bell chiming bright and incongruous. Claire rose, brushed dust from her skirts. Stay here. Rest. I'll be back. She stepped into the store to find Harold Pritchard examining a tin of peaches with the expression of a man evaluating a gold claim. Harold owned the Copper Ridge Bank and Trust, which meant he owned half the town and held mortgages on the other half, including hers. Mrs. Dawson, he set down the peaches without buying them. I was hoping to find you. Every muscle in Claire's body tightened. Mr. Pritchard, I wanted to give you fair warning, since Thomas was always a friend of mine. Harold's smile was all teeth, no warmth. Your note comes due in 6 weeks, August 15th. She knew. God, she knew. The date haunted her dreams. I'm aware. $700 is a considerable sum. I'll have it. His eyebrows rose. Will you? Because from what I hear, you're barely clearing expenses, and that's before we talk about the interest. Claire forced herself to meet his eyes. I said I'll have it. I certainly hope so. He moved toward the door, then paused. Be ashamed to see this place go to auction. But business is business, Claire. I'm sure you understand. He left. The bell chimed again, cheerful as a bird that didn't know it was singing in a graveyard. Claire's hands were shaking. She pressed them flat against the counter, breathing slow and deliberate until the panic subsided. $700. She'd need a miracle. And she'd stopped believing in those the day Thomas's horse came home without him. When she returned to the back room, Eli was sitting up, cornbread finished, color returning to his face. The man in your store, he said carefully. He's trying to take this place from you. That's not your concern. You helped me. That makes it my concern. Claire almost smiled. You're a good boy, Eli, but some problems don't have solutions. Everything has a solution. He said it with the certainty of someone who'd spent a lifetime solving the problem of how to survive in a body that didn't work the way it should. You just have to find the right leverage. Before Claire could answer, the door opened again. No bell this time. Whoever it was had entered from the back, through the alley entrance she rarely used. A man filled the doorway. Not tall, but broad, built like a man who'd spent his life working with his hands. He wore range clothes, leather vest, dust-stained shirt, boots that had walked 1,000 miles. His face was weathered, creased with lines that spoke of sun and wind and hard decisions. But it was his eyes that caught her, gray as storm clouds and just as unreadable. Eli. The word came out flat. Not angry, not relieved, just flat. The boy stiffened. Father. So this was the rancher. Claire stepped forward, putting herself between them without quite meaning to. Your son needed help. I gave it. The man's gaze shifted to her, and Claire felt the weight of it like a physical thing. He was evaluating her, taking her measure in a way that made her spine straighten. Gideon Cross. He didn't offer his hand. I appreciate your kindness to my boy. Claire Dawson. And he's not your boy. He's a person with a name who is lying in the street like something people step over. Something flickered in those gray eyes. Surprise, maybe. People probably didn't speak to Gideon Cross that way. I'm aware of my son's situation. Are you? Because he walked here on crutches that are tearing his skin apart, and he hasn't eaten in 3 days. He left the ranch of his own accord. Because you made him feel like he doesn't matter. The words were out before Claire could stop them. The silence that followed felt dangerous, charged like the air before lightning strikes. Gideon's jaw tightened. You don't know what you're talking about. Don't I? I just spent the last hour with a boy who thinks his father would rather he didn't exist because he can't rope a steer or break a horse. So you tell me what I'm missing. Father. Eli's voice cracked. It's fine. I'll come home. You're damn right you will. Gideon's attention swung back to his son. And we're going to talk about this habit you have of making everyone think I'm some kind of monster. I never said you didn't have to. Gideon moved into the room, and Claire realized just how much space he took up. Not physically, though he was substantial enough. It was something else. Presence. Power. The kind of man who was used to being obeyed. He scooped Eli up, crutches and all, with an ease that spoke of practice. The boy's face flushed with humiliation. "I can walk." "I know you can. But we're 3 miles from home. It's 100 degrees, and you're half starved. So for once in your life, Eli, don't fight me." Gideon turned to Claire. "What do I owe you for the food and care?" "Nothing. I pay my debts, Mrs. Dawson." "Then teach your son that his worth isn't measured by what he can do with his legs." The words hung in the air between them. Gideon's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes shifted, darkened. "You got children, Mrs. Dawson?" "No." "Then maybe don't tell me how to raise mine." He was at the door when Eli spoke, his voice small and desperate. "Thank you. For the water and the cornbread." Claire's throat tightened. "You're welcome. Come back anytime." Gideon's back stiffened, but he didn't turn around. He just walked out into the brutal afternoon sun, carrying his son like he weighed nothing at all. Claire stood in the empty doorway long after they'd gone, her heart hammering in her chest. She'd just called out the most powerful rancher in the territory. Brilliant. As if she didn't have enough problems. But when she closed her eyes, she saw Eli's face, the way it had lit up when she said he was welcome, the hunger in his expression that had nothing to do with food. Some things mattered more than wisdom. 3 days later, a woman arrived at Claire's store driving a wagon pulled by 2 matched horses that probably cost more than Claire's entire inventory. She was older, maybe 50, with iron gray hair pulled into a severe bun and a dress that managed to be both practical and expensive. Her face was all sharp angles and no-nonsense efficiency. "Mrs. Dawson?" Claire set down the bolt of calico she'd been measuring. "Yes?" "My name is Margaret Holloway. I manage the household at Cross Ranch." She said it the way someone might say, "I manage the United States Treasury." "Mr. Cross would like to speak with you about a business proposition." Claire's stomach dropped. "What kind of proposition?" "That's between you and him, but I'm authorized to tell you it involves his son, and it would require you to relocate to the ranch for a period of several months, room and board provided, plus a salary." "A salary." Claire heard herself say the words like they were in a foreign language. $50 a month. The number hit her like cold water. $50. She cleared 30 on a good month at the store, and those were getting rarer. 6 months at that rate would cover her mortgage, with enough left over to restock and maybe, just maybe, start building a cushion. "When does he want to meet?" "Now, if possible. I can watch your store while you come out to the ranch. Or we can talk here, but Mr. Cross prefers privacy for business discussions." Claire looked around her little store, at the half-empty shelves, the worn floorboards, the ledger full of red ink, at the life she'd been barely clinging to for 3 years. "Give me 5 minutes to change." Cross Ranch sprawled across the valley like a kingdom. Claire counted 4 barns, 2 bunkhouses, a sprawling main house that would have looked more at home in Virginia than Arizona, and corrals that seemed to stretch to the horizon. Cattle dotted the grassland in every direction, more than she could count. This wasn't just a ranch. It was an empire. Margaret led her through the front door, hand-carved, probably imported, into an entrance hall that could have swallowed Claire's entire store. A staircase swept upward in a graceful curve. Paintings hung on the walls, real oil paintings in gilt frames. And everywhere, the smell of beeswax and lavender and money. "Wait here." Claire stood in the center of the hall, suddenly conscious of her faded calico dress, her worn boots, the way her hands were rough from work. She clasped them behind her back and lifted her chin. She'd done nothing to be ashamed of. Footsteps on the stairs. Eli appeared, moving slowly, gripping the banister with white-knuckled determination. He'd been cleaned up, dressed in clothes that actually fit, his hair combed back from his face. He looked like a different boy, but his eyes, those fierce, wary eyes, were the same. "You came. Your father asked me to. He's been different since we got back, quieter." Eli reached the bottom of the stairs, breathing hard from the effort. "I think you scared him." "I doubt that." You don't know him. Nobody scares my father, but you did. Before Claire could respond, a door opened down the hall, and Gideon emerged from what looked like an office. He'd cleaned up too, fresh shirt, hair still damp from washing, but the storm cloud eyes were the same, unreadable and assessing. Mrs. Dawson, thank you for coming. He gestured toward the office. Shall we? The office was all dark wood and leather, dominated by a massive desk covered in ledgers and papers. Maps hung on the walls, territory maps, grazing maps, water rights maps. This was the nerve center of Cross Ranch, and Gideon sat behind that desk like a general surveying a battlefield. Claire took the chair across from him and met his gaze levelly. I'll be direct, Gideon said. My son needs someone who sees him as more than his disability. Someone who will talk to him like a person instead of a problem. You did that in 5 minutes. I've been trying for 12 years and failing. So you want to hire me to do what you should be doing yourself? A muscle jumped in his jaw. I want to hire you to help me do it better. Eli responds to you. I don't know why, and frankly, I don't care. What I care about is that for the first time in months, he's talking to me without flinching. Claire studied him. There was something raw in his voice, a crack in that armor of control. What exactly would you want me to do? Live here. Be available to Eli. Talk with him. Teach him if you can. His mother insisted on education, and I've been too busy keeping this ranch running to continue it properly. Just be someone he can trust. And you think you can buy that? I think I can provide the circumstances for it to happen. Gideon leaned forward. Look, Mrs. Dawson, I know how this sounds. Rich man wants to throw money at his problems. But Eli is not a problem. He's my son, and he deserves better than what I've been able to give him. You showed him kindness without expecting anything in return. That's rare. It's called basic human decency, which is rarer than you'd think. He pulled out a piece of paper, began writing. $50 a month. Private room in the main house. All meals provided. Access to the library, the grounds, anything you need. 6-month term to start. Renegotiable if both parties are satisfied. He slid the paper across the desk. The numbers swam in front of Claire's eyes. $300. More than enough to save her store. Enough to live on after, if she was careful. Why me? You could hire a real teacher, a governess from back east. I could. They'd last 2 weeks before Eli drove them off. He's got a talent for making proper people uncomfortable. Something that might have been pride flickered in Gideon's eyes. But you didn't flinch. You saw a boy who needed help, and you helped. That's what he needs. Someone real. Claire looked down at the contract. The words blurred. This was charity, wasn't it? Elaborate, expensive charity. Gideon Cross trying to ease his conscience by throwing money at the widow who'd embarrassed him. But then she thought of Eli's face when she'd said he was welcome. The desperate hope. The way he'd tried to thank her even as his father carried him away. I have one condition, she heard herself say. Gideon's eyebrows rose. Which is? You spend time with him too. Real time. Not just checking that he's eating or doing his studies. Actually talk to your son. I talk to him. You give him orders. There's a difference. The silence stretched thin and dangerous. Then, slowly, Gideon nodded. Deal. Claire picked up the pen. Her hand shook slightly as she signed her name, the ink dark and permanent on the expensive paper. What was she doing? When do I start? Tomorrow, if possible. Margaret will help you move your things. I'll need to arrange something for the store. Keep it. Hire someone to run it or close it temporarily. I'll advance you the first month's salary today. He opened a drawer, counted out bills, more cash than Claire had seen since before Thomas died. Consider it a gesture of good faith. Claire took the money, trying not to let her hands shake. Mr. Cross, I should tell you, I'm not a miracle worker. I can't fix what's broken between you and Eli. I'm not asking you to fix it. I'm asking you to help me understand how to do it myself. He stood, extended his hand. Do we have an agreement? His palm was calloused, work roughened. The handshake was firm, businesslike. But something in his eyes, some flicker of vulnerability quickly suppressed, made Claire wonder if Gideon Cross was as unshakable as he pretended. We have an agreement, Chad, Margaret arrived at dawn the next day with a wagon and 2 ranch hands to help move Claire's meager possessions. It didn't take long. 3 years of widowhood hadn't left her with much worth keeping. Clothes, a few books, Thomas's watch, the quilt her mother had made, everything fit in 4 crates. Harold Pritchard watched from his bank window as they loaded the wagon. Claire saw the curtain twitch, saw his narrow face peering out. Let him watch. Let him wonder. For the first time in 3 years, she wasn't at his mercy. She left a sign on the store door, temporarily closed, inquiries to Cross Ranch. By noon, she was standing in a bedroom that was larger than her entire store back room. A 4-poster bed dominated one wall, made up with linens so white they seemed to glow. A wardrobe, a washstand with a real porcelain basin, a writing desk positioned near the window to catch the afternoon light, curtains that weren't flour sacks, a rug, an actual rug, soft under her boots. "This is too much," she whispered. Margaret, unpacking Claire's clothes with brisk efficiency, snorted. "This is the smallest guest room. You should see the master suite." "I don't belong here." "Nobody belongs anywhere until they decide to." Margaret hung the last dress, threadbare, patched twice, in the vast wardrobe where it looked lost and shabby. Mr. Cross made his decision. "Now you make yours." A knock at the door. Eli stood in the hallway, leaning on his crutches, trying to look casual and failing. "Want to see the library?" Claire glanced at Margaret, who waved her off. "Go. I'll finish here." The library was 2 floors down, tucked at the back of the house. Eli led the way slowly, and Claire matched his pace without comment. He seemed to appreciate that, the lack of hovering, the assumption that he could navigate his own home. The room took her breath away. Books, hundreds of them, maybe thousands, lining floor-to-ceiling shelves on 3 walls. The 4th wall was dominated by windows overlooking a garden where roses bloomed in defiance of the desert heat. Leather chairs clustered around a fireplace, the smell of paper and binding glue and possibility. "My mother collected them," Eli said quietly. "She died when I was 6. But she always said books were windows to everywhere you couldn't walk." Claire ran her fingers along the spines. Poetry, philosophy, science, history, novels from England and France and places she'd only dreamed of. "She sounds like she was remarkable." "She was." He moved to one of the chairs, lowering himself carefully. "Father hasn't changed anything in here since she passed. I think he's afraid if he moves something, he'll lose the last piece of her." "Is that why he's so hard on you? Because you remind him of what he lost?" Eli's laugh was bitter. "No, he's hard on me because I'm broken, and he doesn't know how to fix me. He's a man who solves problems. I'm a problem he can't solve, so he pretends I'm not one." "You're not broken. Tell that to my leg." "Your leg is injured. You are not your leg." Claire sat across from him. "And if your father can't see that, then he's the one who's broken." Eli stared at her. Then slowly, something in his face cracked open. Not tears. He was too proud for that. But something deeper. Relief, maybe. Or hope. "He's watching us," Eli murmured, gaze flicking to the doorway. Claire didn't turn around. "Let him watch." Footsteps in the hall, moving away. "He does that," Eli said. "Watches from a distance. Like he's trying to figure out how to be close without actually having to risk anything. Some people are afraid of their own hearts." "Are you?" The question caught her off guard. Claire thought of Thomas, of the way grief had carved her hollow for 3 years, of how she'd built walls around herself because letting anyone close meant risking that pain again. "Yes," she said quietly. "I think I am." Then we're all scared together." Eli pulled a book from the side table, a worn copy of Shakespeare's sonnets. "Mother used to read to me from this. Want to hear?" "I'd like that." His voice was soft but steady, reading words about love and loss and time's relentless passage. Claire closed her eyes and let the poetry wash over her, and for the first time in longer than she could remember, she felt something like peace. Outside the library, Gideon Cross stood in the hallway, listening to his son's voice through the door. For 12 years, he'd been trying to reach the boy. For 12 years, he'd failed. And then a broke widow from town walked into his life and managed it in 5 minutes. He didn't know whether to be grateful or terrified. Probably both. He turned and walked back to his office, the sound of Eli's reading following him down the hall like a ghost. Dinner that first night was an education in silence. The dining room could have seated 20, but only 3 places were set at one end of the long mahogany table. Gideon at the head, Eli to his right, Claire to his left. Margaret brought out courses: soup, roast beef, vegetables that hadn't come from a can, that would have fed Claire for a week. "How was your first day?" Gideon asked, his voice carefully neutral. "Overwhelming," Claire answered honestly. "This house it's a lot to take in." "Mother designed most of it," Eli said. "She wanted space for entertaining, parties, balls, that sort of thing." "Did she get to have them?" Father and son exchanged a glance. "A few," Gideon said, "before she got sick." The weight of loss settled over the table like dust. Claire pushed food around her plate, suddenly aware of all the ghosts living in this house. Not just Eli's mother, but the family they might have been, the life that never materialized. "I saw some of the other structures on the property," Claire said, breaking the silence. "Are those bunkhouses?" "2 of them. I run 40 hands during the busy season, fewer in winter." Gideon cut his beef with precise movements. "Ranch this size doesn't run itself." "What exactly do you raise?" "Cattle, primarily. Some horses. We supply beef to the forts, the mining camps, towns throughout the territory. It's a good business when the weather cooperates and the rustlers don't." "Are rustlers a problem?" "They're always a problem. But I've got good men watching the herds." He glanced at Eli. "Your son told me you have maps in your office, territory maps." "I do." Gideon's fork paused halfway to his mouth. "You interested in maps?" "I'm interested in understanding how this place works. If I'm going to be living here, I'd like to know what I'm part of." Something shifted in Gideon's expression. Respect, maybe. "I can show you tomorrow, if you want." "I'd like that." Eli watched the exchange with poorly concealed satisfaction, as if he'd orchestrated a successful military campaign. After dinner, Margaret showed Claire to the back porch, a wide veranda overlooking the valley. The sun was setting, painting the desert in shades of copper and gold. The temperature dropped 10 degrees the moment the sun touched the horizon, that strange desert mercy where day's furnace became night's balm. Claire leaned against the railing, breathing air that smelled like sage and dust and distance. "Quite a view." She turned. Gideon stood in the doorway, 2 cups in his hands. He offered her one, coffee, dark and strong. "Thank you." He joined her at the railing, keeping a careful distance. They stood in silence for a while, watching the light fade. "I want you to know," Gideon finally said, "I'm not trying to replace his mother." "I know. And I'm not looking for anything else." Claire glanced at him, saw the awkwardness in his shoulders. "Mr. Cross, I'm here to help your son. That's all. If you're worried I have designs on becoming the new Mrs. Cross, you can relax. I buried one husband. I'm not eager to acquire another." His laugh was short, surprised. "Blunt. Honest. There's a difference." "Is there?" "Honesty can be kind. Bluntness is just truth without consideration." She sipped the coffee. "I'm trying for honesty." Gideon was quiet, turning his cup in his hands. "I was 18 when I came out here. My father had a vision. Build an empire, establish a legacy. He died before he could see it realized. So I did it for him. Built this ranch from 60 head of cattle in a dream. That must have been hard. It was necessary. Hard doesn't enter into it." He stared out at his kingdom. "I met Eli's mother at a Cattlemen's Association dinner in Tucson. She was from Philadelphia, visiting family. Smartest woman I ever met. She took one look at this place and saw what it could be. Not just a ranch, but a real home." "She sounds remarkable." "She was. And when she died, He trailed off, jaw tight. "I didn't know how to be what Eli needed. The ranch, I understood. But a grieving boy who couldn't run or ride or do any of the things I knew how to teach? I was lost." Claire set down her cup. "Mr. Cross." "Gideon. If we're going to be honest, use my name. Gideon, your son doesn't need you to teach him to rope cattle. He needs you to show him he matters for who he is, not what he can do."
I'm trying. God knows I'm trying. Then try with him, not around him. Stop watching from doorways. Sit with him. Listen when he talks. Fail in front of him so he learns that failing isn't the end of the world. Gideon looked at her then, really looked. His eyes were storm gray and full of things he didn't know how to say. You make it sound simple. It is simple. It's just not easy. He held her gaze a moment longer, then nodded slowly. I'll try. That's all anyone can do. They stood together as full dark fell, the desert singing its night song of crickets and distant coyotes. And for the first time since she'd arrived, Claire thought maybe, just maybe, she'd made the right choice. Even if every instinct she had screamed that nothing this good could possibly last. The first week passed in a rhythm Claire hadn't expected. Quiet mornings in the library with Eli, afternoons learning the geography of the ranch, evenings on the porch where Gideon would appear with coffee and carefully chosen words. The house began to feel less like a museum and more like a place where people actually lived. Eli was different here than he'd been in town, sharper, funnier. He had opinions about everything from Shakespeare to cattle breeding, and he wasn't shy about sharing them. Claire discovered he could do complex mathematics in his head, that he taught himself basic surveying from his mother's books, that he sketched architectural drawings of impossible buildings in the margins of his notebooks. You're wasting yourself, she told him one morning, watching him calculate the volume of the ranch's water cisterns without paper. What else am I supposed to do? He didn't look up from his figures. Can't ride, can't rope, can't do a damn thing that matters on a ranch. You could manage it, the business side. Your father's drowning in ledgers and contracts. He'd never let me. Have you asked? Eli finally met her eyes. You don't understand. He looks at me and sees everything I can't do. Why would he trust me with something that actually matters? Before Claire could answer, raised voices echoed from the front of the house. Male voices, one of them Gideon's, tight with controlled anger. Eli's face shuddered. That'll be Jackson, father's foreman. They've been arguing a lot lately. They found Gideon in the entrance hall with a man who looked like he'd been carved from saddle leather, all lean muscle and sun damage, with eyes the color of creek water and a jaw set for a fight. I'm telling you, something's not right, Jackson was saying. 3 different pastures, 3 different times. Those cattle didn't just wander off. So you're saying what exactly? That someone's stealing from me? Gideon's voice was dangerously quiet. I'm saying the numbers don't add up, and when numbers don't add up on a ranch, it usually means someone's making them not add up. Gideon noticed Claire and Eli on the stairs. His expression smoothed, but tension still radiated from him like heat from a stove. Jackson, this isn't the time. With respect, boss, it's exactly the time. We've lost near 100 head in 6 months. That's money walking away on 4 legs. I'm aware of what it means. Gideon's jaw tightened. We'll discuss this in my office, not in front of your son? Jackson's gaze flicked to Eli, something like sympathy in his weathered face. Boy's nearly grown. Maybe it's time he learned how a ranch really works. The silence that followed felt like standing in a thunderstorm, waiting for lightning to strike. My office, Gideon repeated. Now. Jackson nodded curtly and disappeared down the hall. Gideon started to follow, then paused, looking back at Eli. You want to learn the business? Come on. Eli's eyes went wide. He looked at Claire, who nodded. Then he grabbed his crutches and moved toward his father with more speed than grace, determination written in every awkward step. Gideon waited, didn't offer help, didn't hurry him, just waited until Eli reached his side, then together they walked to the office. Claire released a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. Well, Margaret said from the doorway to the kitchen, that's a first. What is? Mr. Cross-letting Eli into his business discussions. Usually keeps the boy wrapped up like china, afraid he'll break. Margaret's smile was thin but genuine. You're good for them, Mrs. Dawson. Both of them. I'm just doing what I was hired to do. No. Margaret shook her head. You're doing what they need, which isn't always the same thing. The office door remained closed for over an hour. When it finally opened, Eli emerged looking exhausted but lit from within, the way a man looks after climbing a mountain. He let me see the ledgers, Eli said, collapsing into the library chair. Jackson's right. The numbers are off.
But it's subtle. If you weren't looking for it, you'd miss it. What did your father say? He wants me to help track it, check the tallies against the actual counts, cross-reference with the sales records. Eli's hands shook slightly as he spoke, from fatigue or excitement or both. He's actually asking for my help with something that matters. Claire smiled. Told you. You did. He looked at her with something approaching awe. How did you know he'd listen? Because he loves you. He's just been scared of failing you. Sometimes people need permission to take that risk. What about you? Eli asked quietly. Are you scared of failing us? The question hit deeper than he probably intended. Claire thought about her store gathering dust, about Harold Pritchard's mortgage and the fragile security she'd traded for this strange new life, about the way her heart had started doing complicated things when Gideon looked at her with those storm cloud eyes. Terrified, she admitted. Good. If you weren't scared, I'd think you didn't care. That evening, Claire found Gideon alone on the porch, staring at a ledger by lamplight. He looked older in the yellow glow, lines carved deeper, shoulders carrying weight she was only beginning to understand. How bad is it? She asked. He didn't pretend not to know what she meant. Bad enough. 100 head over 6 months. Could be simple theft. Could be something more organized. What does Jackson think? Jackson thinks I've got someone on the inside playing me for a fool. Gideon closed the ledger with a snap. He's probably right. I've been so focused on keeping this place running, I stopped paying attention to who was actually doing the running. You can't watch everything. It's my job to watch everything. He rubbed his face, suddenly looking bone-tired. My father used to say a ranch is like a living thing. You have to know every part of it, every weakness, or something will rot from the inside while you're looking the other way. Your father sounds like he was hard to please. He was impossible to please, which is why I spent 20 years trying. Gideon's laugh was hollow. Funny thing is, I look at Eli and I see myself doing the same damn thing, making him prove he's worthy of something he should have by birthright. You invited him into your office today because you shamed me into it. I gave you permission to do what you already wanted to do. Claire leaned against the railing beside him, close enough to feel the heat radiating from his body in the cooling desert air. There's a difference. Is there? He echoed her words from days ago, but without humor. Yes, shame makes you act out of guilt. Permission makes you act out of hope. Gideon turned to face her fully. In the lamplight, his eyes were more silver than gray, reflecting the flame. You're an unusual woman, Claire Dawson. Because I speak my mind? Because you speak it, and you're not afraid of the consequences. He moved closer, not quite touching, but near enough that she could smell leather and sage, and something underneath that was just him. Most people around me say what they think I want to hear. I'm not most people. No. His voice dropped lower. You're not. The air between them felt charged, dangerous. Claire's heart hammered against her ribs. This was a line they shouldn't cross. She was here for Eli. She was hired help. She was a widow who'd sworn off complications. But God, she was tired of being careful. Mr. Cross? Gideon. Gideon, we should probably maintain some boundaries. Probably? He didn't move back. Are you going to maintain them? Are you? His smile was slow, devastating. I'm thinking about it. Then he stepped back, the moment breaking like a soap bubble. Good night, Claire. Good night. She watched him walk back into the house, her pulse still racing, and wondered what the hell she'd just started. The next morning brought visitors. Claire was working with Eli on his arithmetic when Margaret appeared in the library doorway, her face carefully neutral in a way that suggested trouble. Mrs. Dawson, there's a woman here to see Mr. Cross. She's asked to meet you as well. Who is she? Miss Vivian Ashford, the ranch's business manager. Claire hadn't known Cross Ranch had a business manager beyond Gideon himself. Eli's expression suggested this was news to him too, and not welcome news at that. I didn't know Father had hired anyone. He didn't mention it. Margaret's tone was carefully bland. Miss Ashford has been managing the financial affairs and contracts for about 8 months now. She works out of an office in town, handles the sales and negotiations. Eli's jaw tightened. Of course he didn't mention it. They found Gideon in the main parlor with a woman who looked like she'd stepped out of a Boston drawing room. Vivian Ashford was perhaps 35, dressed in a tailored suit that probably cost more than Claire's entire wardrobe. Her dark hair was swept up in an elaborate style, her face beautiful in a sharp, calculated way. Everything about her screamed refinement and ambition. "Ah, Mrs. Dawson." Vivian's smile revealed perfect teeth. "I've heard so much about you. The kind woman who rescued poor Eli from the streets." The way she said poor Eli made Claire's teeth clench. "I offered a child assistance. There was nothing remarkable about it." "Wasn't there?" Vivian turned to Gideon, her hand resting possessively on his arm. "Gideon tells me you've agreed to stay on as Eli's companion. How charitable of you." "I'm being paid. That's employment, not charity." "Of course." Vivian's smile never wavered, but something cold flickered in her eyes. "Though I confess I was surprised when Gideon told me he'd hired someone from town. I had thought if Eli needed supervision, we might look for someone with more formal credentials." "Claire has what Eli needs," Gideon said, his voice flat. "That's all that matters." "Naturally." Vivian released his arm and moved to examine the books on the shelf with the air of someone inventorying property. "I actually came out today to discuss some concerns about our recent cattle sales. The market prices have been fluctuating, and I wanted to review the contracts before we commit to the next shipment." "That's why I pay you," Gideon said, "to handle those concerns." "Yes, but some of the figures Jackson gave me don't match the tallies I have from the buyers. I thought it best to clarify before there's any confusion." Claire watched the exchange carefully. Vivian's body language screamed intimacy with Gideon, the way she moved through his house like she owned it, the casual touches, the possessive pronouns. But Gideon's stance was rigid, uncomfortable. Whatever Vivian thought their relationship was, he clearly didn't share the vision. "Mrs. Dawson," Vivian said suddenly, turning those sharp eyes on Claire. "I understand you ran a general store in town. Such a shame about your financial difficulties. Copper Ridge is so small. It must have been terribly hard to make ends meet." The sympathy was acid-coated. Claire forced a smile. "I managed. Until you couldn't. How fortunate that Gideon stepped in." Vivian's gaze slid to Eli, who was white-knuckled on his crutches. "He has such a generous heart, always helping those in need." "Miss Ashford," Eli said, his voice tight, "if you're here to work, shouldn't you be working?" "Such spirit." Vivian's laugh was musical, patronizing. "Your father is lucky to have such a protective son." Gideon's jaw was clenched so tight, Claire could see the muscle jumping. "Vivian, if you need to review the contracts, let's do it in my office. Now." "Of course." She glided toward the door, then paused. "Oh, Mrs. Dawson, one more thing. I hope you understand your position here is temporary. Once Eli is settled, I'm sure Gideon will want to return to more conventional arrangements." "I understand my employment perfectly, thank you." Vivian's smile sharpened. "I'm sure you do." When they were gone, Eli exploded. "I hate her. God, I hate her. Eli, she's been circling father like a vulture for months, acting like she owns this place, like she owns him, and he just lets her." "I don't think he lets her anything." He looked uncomfortable. "He's always uncomfortable around women, ever since Mother died." Eli sank into a chair. "But Vivian doesn't take hints. She wants to be the new Mrs. Cross, and she doesn't care who she has to step on to get there." Claire thought about the way Vivian had looked at her, assessing, calculating the threat. "I'm not competition for her." "Aren't you?" Eli's gaze was too knowing for a 12-year-old. "I've seen the way father looks at you. It's not the way he looks at Vivian." We're not. Claire's face heated. "Your father and I have a professional relationship." "Sure you do." Eli's smile was mischievous despite his anger. "That's why you both get that weird look when you're in the same room." "There's no look." "There's definitely a look." Before Claire could argue further, Jackson appeared in the doorway, his face grim. "Mrs. Dawson, if you've got a minute, I need a word." They walked out to the corral where horses moved in lazy circles under the morning sun. Jackson leaned against the fence, his weathered hands clasped in front of him. "I'm going to be direct," he said. "Watch Miss Ashford." "Why?" "Because something's not sitting right. She shows up 8 months ago with credentials from Denver, says she's got experience managing cattle operations. Gideon's drowning in paperwork at the time, so he hires her. Makes sense, right?" "Seems reasonable. Except the timing. The discrepancies in the cattle counts, they started about 6 months ago, right around when Vivian starts handling more of the sales contracts." Jackson's Creekwater eyes were sharp. "Could be coincidence. But you don't think it is?" "I think when money goes missing and a beautiful woman with access to the books starts making herself indispensable to the boss, you pay attention." He straightened. "And I think she sees you as a threat, which means you need to be careful. I'm just here for Eli." "Are you?" Jackson's smile was knowing. "Because from where I'm standing, you're here for all of them. You're making this house feel like a home again instead of a tomb. That's dangerous for someone like Vivian, who's been working very hard to position herself as the only woman Gideon needs." Claire's stomach knotted. "I'm not trying to position myself as anything." "I know, that's why you're dangerous." Jackson tipped his hat. "Just watch your back, Mrs. Dawson. Vivian Ashford didn't get where she is by playing fair." That night, Claire couldn't sleep. She kept seeing Vivian's calculating smile, kept hearing the way she'd called Eli, poor Eli, like he was a broken thing to be pitied, kept remembering Jackson's warning. She finally gave up and went downstairs, thinking she'd find a book in the library. Instead, she found Gideon at the dining room table, surrounded by papers, a bottle of whiskey at his elbow. "Couldn't sleep either?" she asked. He looked up, eyes shadowed. "I keep running the numbers. Every way I turn them, I come up short. Either I'm blind or stupid, and I don't like either option. Or you're dealing with someone who's very good at hiding what they're doing. You think it's Vivian?" Not a question. Claire sat across from him. "Jackson does. Jackson's been suspicious of her since day one. Thinks she's too polished, too smooth. But her credentials checked out, her references were solid, and God knows I needed the help." Gideon poured himself 2 fingers of whiskey, then pushed the bottle toward Claire in silent offer. She poured a smaller measure. "What made you hire her?" "Desperation. And she knew cattle markets, knew contracts, knew how to negotiate with the buyers. She saved me 3 months of work in the first week." He drank. "But lately—" "What?" "She's been pushing, suggesting changes to how I run the ranch, who I hire, how I spend my money. Little things at first, now bigger ones. She thinks Eli should be sent east to a school that specializes in his condition." The bitterness in his voice was sharp enough to cut. "As if he's defective." "What did you tell her?" "That my son stays with me. That didn't go over well." Gideon's smile was humorless. "She's been colder ever since you arrived, more proprietary, like she's trying to mark territory." "Maybe she is. I never gave her reason to think—" He stopped. "We're business associates. That's all." "Does she know that?" Gideon met her eyes across the table, the lamplight casting shadows across his face. "I'm not interested in Vivian Ashford. I never was. But I was too busy to notice she was interested in me until it was too late to draw the line without making things awkward. And now? Now I've got bigger problems than hurt feelings." He gestured at the papers. "If she's stealing from me, I need proof. Eli's been going through the old ledgers, trying to trace where the discrepancies started. He's got a good head for patterns." "He does. You should tell him that." "I did, this afternoon." Gideon's expression softened slightly. He looked at me like I'd handed him the keys to the kingdom. Made me realize how long it's been since I praised him for anything other than not causing trouble. "You're learning." "I'm trying." He finished his whiskey. "Claire, if this goes where I think it's going, if Vivian is involved in something criminal, it's going to get ugly. She's not going to go quietly. And if she thinks you're part of why I'm pushing her away, I can handle myself. I know you can. But I need you to promise me something." He leaned forward, intensity radiating from him. "If anything feels wrong, if she says or does anything that makes you uncomfortable, you tell me immediately. Don't try to handle it alone." "Why? Because I'm just the help?" Because you're... He stopped, jaw working. Because you matter. To Eli. To this house. To me. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning neither of them was quite ready to acknowledge. Claire's heart hammered against her ribs. Gideon, I know. Boundaries. He stood abruptly. I'm going to bed before I say something else I shouldn't. He was halfway to the door when Claire spoke. For what it's worth, you matter too. To Eli. To me. He stopped. Didn't turn around, just stood there for a long moment, his back to her, shoulders tense. Good night, Claire. Good night. She sat alone in the lamplight, the taste of whiskey on her tongue and the ghost of his words in her ears. This was getting complicated. More than complicated. She'd come here to save her store, to help a boy who needed kindness. She hadn't planned on falling into something that felt suspiciously like family. And she definitely hadn't planned on the way her heart lurched every time Gideon Cross looked at her like she was something precious. The next 2 weeks settled into an uneasy rhythm. Eli worked through the ledgers with the focus of a scholar, filling pages with calculations and cross-references. Vivian appeared twice more, each visit marked by subtle barbs and proprietary glances at Gideon. Jackson watched everything with the patience of a man waiting for a rattlesnake to show itself. And Claire found herself drawn deeper into the life of Cross Ranch, learning its rhythms and rituals, becoming part of something larger than herself. She helped Margaret with the kitchen garden, learning which herbs grew best in the desert soil. She watched the ranch hands work the cattle, understanding now why Jackson was concerned. The numbers should have been higher. She sat with Eli through thunderstorms when his leg ached, reading to him until the pain medication took hold. And she stood on the porch with Gideon in the evenings, talking about everything and nothing, drawing closer to a line they both knew they shouldn't cross. It was Margaret who finally broke the careful dance they were all performing. Mr. Cross is having dinner in town tonight, she announced one afternoon. Miss Ashford's invitation. She's arranged something at the hotel restaurant. Eli's face darkened. Is Claire going? I wasn't invited, Claire said quickly. Of course you weren't. Eli threw down his pencil. Because Vivian wants father alone. She's probably going to make some grand declaration, try to force his hand. Your father can take care of himself. Can he? Eli's eyes were fierce. He's brilliant with cattle and land and business, but with women, with people who lie with smiles, he's blind. Claire wanted to argue, but she thought about Gideon's admission that he hadn't noticed Vivian's interest until too late, about the way he avoided confrontation when it came to personal matters, as if emotions were foreign territory where his usual confidence failed him. He'll be fine, she said, with more certainty than she felt. Gideon left at sunset, cleaned up in a suit that made him look like a stranger. He paused in the hallway, met Claire's eyes. If I'm not back by midnight, send Jackson with a rescue party. It's just dinner. With Vivian, nothing's just anything. He looked like he wanted to say more, but Eli was watching, and Margaret was hovering, so he just nodded and left. Claire tried to read, tried to help Eli with his studies, tried to do anything except watch the clock and wonder what was happening in town. By 10 o'clock, her nerves were strung tight as fence wire. Stop pacing, Eli said from his chair. You're making me nervous. I'm not pacing. You've circled the library 6 times in the last hour. Claire forced herself to sit. I'm just concerned about your father. You're concerned about what Vivian might say to him or do to him. Eli closed his book. You care about him. Of course I care. He's my employer. That's not what I mean, and you know it. Before Claire could respond, they heard hoofbeats in the drive, fast, urgent. Both of them moved to the window. Gideon dismounted with barely controlled violence, his face thunderous in the lamplight. He stalked toward the house like a man spoiling for a fight. That doesn't look good, Eli murmured. They heard the front door slam, heard Gideon's boots on the hardwood. Then he appeared in the library doorway, tie loosened, fury radiating from every line of his body. She offered me a partnership. Claire blinked. What? Vivian. Over dinner, with wine and candlelight and all the trappings of seduction, she laid out a proposal. Merge her business interests with mine, formalize our arrangement, present ourselves as a united front to the territory's business community. His laugh was harsh. Except it wasn't really a proposal.
It was an ultimatum dressed in silk.
What do you mean? She said if I don't agree to make our relationship official, her words, not mine, she'll take her contracts and connections elsewhere. Every buyer she's cultivated, every deal she's negotiated, gone. She made it very clear that without her, I'd lose half my market access overnight. Eli sucked in a breath. That's extortion. That's business, according to Vivian. Gideon ran a hand through his hair. And the hell of it is, she's probably right. She's made herself indispensable. If she walks, it'll cost me. But you said no, Claire said quietly. He met her eyes across the room. I said no. Something warm and dangerous bloomed in Claire's chest. What did she say? That I was making a mistake. That I was letting sentiment cloud my judgment. That... He stopped, jaw tight. That certain people had distorted my thinking, and I'd regret choosing poorly. She means me, Claire's voice was flat. She means both of you, Gideon said, looking at Eli. She thinks you're my weakness, that caring about you makes me vulnerable. Maybe it does, Eli said softly. Then I'm vulnerable. Gideon moved into the room, his presence filling it. I've spent 12 years trying to build something that would outlast me, an empire that would stand as proof that I mattered, that the cross name meant something. But you know what I realized tonight, watching Vivian try to buy her way into my life? What? Claire asked. That none of it matters if I lose you, either of you. He looked at his son. Eli, you're worth more than every head of cattle on this ranch. You're brilliant and brave, and I've been too blind to see it. I'm sorry. Eli's eyes were bright with unshed tears. Father! And Claire. Gideon turned to her, his storm cloud eyes intense. I know this isn't what you signed up for. I know we've got boundaries and professional distance and all the things we're supposed to maintain. But I need you to know, you've given this house something I thought died with my wife. You've given it life. Claire couldn't breathe, couldn't think, could only stand there as Gideon Cross, feared rancher, powerful man, made himself completely vulnerable. So Vivian can take her ultimatums and her contracts and go straight to hell, he finished. I'll rebuild what I lose, but I won't lose what actually matters. The silence that followed felt sacred, fragile. Then Eli spoke, his voice cracking. Does this mean Claire gets to stay? Gideon smiled, and for the first time since she'd met him, it reached his eyes. If she wants to. They both looked at her. Father and son, this broken family she'd stumbled into, asking her to stay, to be part of something she hadn't known she was missing. Claire thought about her store gathering dust, about Harold Pritchard's mortgage and the life she'd left behind, about 3 years of grief and loneliness and scraping by on pride and determination. And she thought about sitting in this library reading Shakespeare with a boy who deserved better than the world had given him, about standing on the porch with a man who was learning to be vulnerable, about Margaret's knowing smiles and Jackson's protective warnings and the way this strange house had become something like home. I want to stay, she said. Eli whooped. Gideon's expression transformed into something that stole what was left of Claire's breath. And somewhere in town, Vivian Ashford realized she'd just lost a war she'd thought was already won. But wars don't end with a single battle. And Vivian Ashford was not a woman who accepted defeat gracefully. 3 days after Gideon's rejection, she arrived at the ranch with a wagon full of files and ledgers, her face a mask of professional courtesy that didn't quite hide the ice underneath. I'm here to complete the transition, she announced, setting crates on Gideon's desk with deliberate care. Since you've decided to terminate our business relationship, I thought it best to return all ranch documents to your custody immediately. Gideon looked up from the contract he'd been reviewing, his expression unreadable. I appreciate your efficiency. I pride myself on it. Vivian's smile was sharp enough to draw blood. Though I must say, I'm surprised you're willing to take on all this work yourself again. The market contacts alone will take months to rebuild. I'll manage. Will you? She pulled out a leather portfolio, set it on the desk with a soft thud. These are the outstanding contracts with the forts and mining camps. I've noted which buyers will likely honor existing agreements and which will require renegotiation. Without my relationships, I estimate you'll lose 30% of your current market access. Claire, who'd been working with Eli in the corner of the office, felt her stomach tighten. 30% was a devastating loss for any business. Gideon's jaw was set. I'll find new buyers. Of course you will, eventually. Vivian's gaze slid to Claire, cold and assessing. I do hope your new domestic arrangements are worth the financial sacrifice, Mr. Cross. It would be unfortunate if sentiment proved more expensive than you anticipated. My arrangements are none of your concern, aren't they? Vivian pulled out another folder. Speaking of arrangements, I found some interesting discrepancies while organizing these files. Tallies that don't match between the ranch records and the buyer receipts. Small amounts, barely noticeable, but they add up over time. Jackson, who'd been standing silent near the door, straightened. What kind of discrepancies? The kind that suggests someone has been skimming. A few head here, a dozen there, sold off the books and pocketed. Vivian's expression was all wounded innocence. I hate to bring it up, but as your business manager, I felt obligated to note the irregularities before I left. Gideon's eyes narrowed. When did these discrepancies start? That's the curious thing. The earliest ones I can find date back about 6 months. She paused, letting the timing sink in. Right around when Mrs. Dawson arrived at the ranch. The room went deadly silent. Claire felt the blood drain from her face. Excuse me. I'm not accusing anyone, of course. Vivian's tone was honey over poison. I'm simply noting what the records show. Someone with access to the tallies and the opportunity to alter counts before they're finalized. Someone who might be desperate for money. That's ridiculous, Eli said, his voice shaking with fury. Claire would never— I'm sure Mrs. Dawson is perfectly honest, Vivian interrupted smoothly. But facts are facts. She arrived in June with significant debts. The discrepancies began in June, and she's had unrestricted access to this house and all its records for months now. Gideon stood slowly, his face carved from stone. Get out. I'm only trying to help. You're trying to destroy an innocent woman because I rejected you. That's not help. That's cruelty. His voice was low, dangerous. Take your files and your insinuations and get off my property, now. Vivian's mask cracked, revealing the fury beneath. You're making a terrible mistake, Gideon. When this all comes crashing down, and it will, don't say I didn't warn you. She swept out, leaving the ledgers scattered across the desk like evidence at a crime scene. Claire couldn't breathe. The walls were closing in. She thought of her store, her debts, the way she must look to anyone examining the facts. A desperate widow shows up broke, gets hired by a wealthy rancher, and suddenly cattle start disappearing. I didn't, she whispered. I swear to God, I didn't touch anything. I know. Gideon's voice was firm, but when Claire looked at him, she saw doubt flicker in his eyes. Just for a second. Just enough. And that second was enough to break something inside her. You don't. She stood, her legs unsteady. You want to believe me, but you're thinking about the timing, about how convenient it all looks. Claire, I need some air. She fled before anyone could stop her, through the house and out the back door into the merciless Arizona sun. Her chest was tight, her throat closing. She kept walking past the barns and corrals until she reached the empty pasture where she could finally breathe. This was how it would end. Not with gratitude or family or belonging, but with suspicion and doubt and the slow poison of Vivian's accusations. Even if Gideon believed her, and that flicker of doubt said he didn't, not completely, the shadow would remain. Every time something went wrong, he'd wonder. Every time money went missing or tallies didn't match, her name would be the first one that came to mind. She heard footsteps behind her, slower and uneven. Eli appeared, leaning heavily on his crutches, his face flushed from the effort of crossing the uneven ground. You shouldn't be out here, Claire said. The heat is the least of my concerns right now. He lowered himself to sit on a fence post, breathing hard. You're not running, are you? I'm thinking about it. That's what Vivian wants. She plants the seed of doubt, and when you run, it looks like guilt. Eli's jaw was set with a determination that reminded Claire painfully of his father. But we know you didn't do anything wrong. Do you? Or are you being loyal because that's the kind of person you are? I'm being logical. You arrived in June.
I checked Father's ledgers, the ones Vivian didn't know about, the private ones he keeps in his bedroom safe. The discrepancies actually started in February. She lied about the timing. Claire's head snapped up. What? I found records of missing cattle dating back to February. Small amounts, exactly like she described, but starting 4 months before you arrived. Eli's smile was grim, which means Vivian either didn't look carefully or she deliberately misrepresented the timeline to make you look guilty. Hope warred with caution in Claire's chest. Does your father know? Not yet. I was verifying the numbers when Vivian showed up. He shifted on the post, wincing. But Claire, here's what I don't understand.
If Vivian's involved in the theft, and I think she is, why would she draw attention to the discrepancies at all? Why not just disappear quietly? Because she's not disappearing quietly. She's making sure everyone knows she left because of me, that the problems at the ranch are my fault, not hers. Claire's mind raced. If things fall apart after she's gone, it protects her. She can say she warned Gideon, that she tried to tell him something was wrong, but he was too blinded by his feelings to listen. And if she's stolen enough already, she doesn't need to keep stealing. She just needs to make sure nobody looks too closely at what happened while she was here. Eli's eyes were fierce. We need to prove it before she destroys you. They walked back to the house together, Eli setting the pace, Claire matching his halting steps. When they entered the office, Gideon was standing at the window, his back rigid with tension. Jackson sat at the desk, going through Vivian's ledgers with the focused intensity of a man searching for snakes. The math doesn't work, Jackson said without looking up. She's claiming the discrepancies started in June, but some of these sale dates don't match the receipts. Look here. She says we sold 40 head to Fort Huachuca on June 15th, but the fort's receipt is dated June 2nd. Maybe the dates are wrong, Gideon said, but his voice lacked conviction. Or maybe she's been backdating sales to hide when cattle actually went missing. Jackson looked up. Boss, I know you don't want to think it, but Vivian's our thief. Has to be. She had access, motive, and the knowledge to cover her tracks. What motive? I paid her well. Not well enough to buy what she really wanted. Jackson's glance flicked to Claire, then back to Gideon. She wanted this ranch. Wanted to be Mrs. Cross and run this empire alongside you. When that didn't work out, she decided to take what she could and salt the earth behind her. Gideon's hands clenched into fists. We need proof, real proof, not just suspicious timing. I think I can help with that, Eli said from the doorway. He held up a leather-bound ledger Claire had never seen before. This is your private book, Father, the one you keep in your bedroom safe. I remembered you mentioning it once, so I went to look. Gideon's expression wavered between anger at the invasion of privacy and curiosity about what Eli had found. Curiosity won. And? The discrepancy started in February, 4 months before Claire arrived. Vivian lied about the timeline. Eli opened the book, pointing to entries marked in Gideon's careful hand. See? February 3rd, 12 head missing from the north pasture. February 28th, 8 head from the east range. March 15th, 20 head. Gideon took the book, his face darkening as he cross-referenced the dates against Vivian's ledgers. She changed the dates, made it look like everything started in June. When Claire arrived, Jackson said. Convenient. Too convenient. Gideon closed the ledger with controlled violence. That's not proof she's the thief. That's proof she lied to frame Claire. We still need evidence connecting her to the actual theft. Then we look for it, Claire said. Everyone turned to stare at her. She stepped forward, her fear transforming into something harder, sharper. Vivian said she was organizing files. She probably went through everything in this office, taking what incriminated her and leaving what made me look guilty. But she's human. She makes mistakes. If we go through every record, every receipt, every tally sheet, we'll find something she missed. That'll take days, Jackson said. Then we take days. Claire met Gideon's gaze. I'm not running, and I'm not letting that woman destroy everything you've built because I had the audacity to show your son basic human kindness. Something in Gideon's expression cracked open, the doubt dissolving into something that looked like admiration mixed with regret. Claire, I'm sorry. When I saw those ledgers and heard her accusations, I wanted to dismiss them immediately, but I've been burned before by trusting too easily, and for just a moment, you wondered if I was too good to be true. Claire's throat was tight. I understand. It's what she was counting on. It was wrong of me. It was human of you. She moved to the desk, started organizing the scattered papers. But we're done giving Vivian Ashford power over us. So let's find what she doesn't want us to find. They worked through the night. Claire and Eli handled the sales receipts, cross-referencing dates and amounts. Jackson tackled the shipping manifests, looking for inconsistencies in the counts. Gideon went through every contract Vivian had negotiated, searching for hidden clauses or suspicious terms. Margaret brought coffee and sandwiches at midnight, surveyed the organized chaos, and simply nodded. About time someone took that woman down. By 3 a.m, Claire's eyes were burning and the numbers were starting to blur. But she kept going because stopping meant thinking about the look on Gideon's face when Vivian had made her accusations. That flicker of doubt, that moment of wondering if the woman he'd let into his home was destroying it from the inside. Found something. Jackson's voice cut through the exhausted silence. He held up a shipping manifest, his finger pointing to a line of text. This manifest says we sent 60 head to the Prescott mining camp on April 23rd, but the buyer's receipt, the one Vivian gave us, says we only sent 45. Could be a clerical error, Gideon said, but he was already moving to look. Could be, except the check we received was for 45 head at market price, which means either we shipped 60 and only got paid for 45 inside, or we shipped 45 and someone pocketed the money from the other 15 head, Eli finished. Where would the extra cattle go? Jackson's smile was grim. That's the question. If Vivian's been skimming cattle, she's got to be selling them somewhere. Probably to a buyer who doesn't ask too many questions about where the stock came from. The manifest was filled out by our own hands, Gideon said slowly, so either they're in on it or someone altered the manifest after it was written. Or someone wrote a false manifest to cover the real one. Claire stood, pacing. If I were stealing cattle, I'd create 2 sets of records, one showing what actually happened, one showing what I wanted people to think happened. Keep the false one in the office where everyone can see it. Hide the real one somewhere safe. Vivian's office in town, Jackson said immediately. She works out of that building by the bank. If there's evidence, it'll be there. We can't just break into her office, Gideon said. Why not? She's been stealing from you for months. Because if we get caught, it's our word against hers and we've got no legal standing. We need to do this properly. Gideon rubbed his face, exhaustion making him look older. Tomorrow I'll go to town, talk to the sheriff, see if we can get a warrant to search her records. The sheriff's not going to issue a warrant on suspicion, Jackson argued. Not against a respectable businesswoman based on some inconsistent manifests. We need more. They stared at each other across the desk, the impasse settling over them like dust. Then Eli spoke, his voice quiet but certain. I'll do it. Everyone looked at him. You'll do what? Gideon asked carefully. Break into her office. Tonight, while she's not there. I'm small. I can move quietly, and nobody's going to be looking for a crippled kid to be involved in something like this. He met his father's gaze levelly. You said I was smart. Let me prove it. Absolutely not. Father, no. Gideon's voice was steel. I'm not risking you for some revenge fantasy against Vivian Ashford. It's not revenge. It's justice. Eli's hands were white-knuckled on his crutches. She tried to destroy Claire. She's been stealing from us for months, and now she's going to get away with it because we're too afraid to do what's necessary? I'm afraid of you getting hurt. I've been hurt every day of my life. The words exploded out of Eli, raw and furious. My leg hurts. People staring hurts. Being treated like I'm broken hurts. But you know what hurts most? Being protected so much that I can't prove I'm worth protecting. The silence that followed was suffocating. Gideon's face was pale. Eli, you don't need to prove— Yes, I do. To you. To myself. To everyone who looks at me and sees a liability. Eli's voice cracked. Claire didn't see that. She saw someone who could help, who could matter. And now she's in trouble because of us. So let me help. Claire's heart was breaking. Eli, your father's right. It's too dangerous. Then come with me. Eli turned to her, his eyes blazing. You know what to look for.
I know how to move quietly. We go in, we find the records, we get out. Simple. There's nothing simple about breaking and entering, Gideon said. There's nothing simple about any of this. Eli's frustration boiled over. You spent 12 years building this ranch while I sat on the sidelines watching. Well, now something matters more than cattle and land, and I can help save it. So either trust me to do this, or admit you'll never see me as anything but your broken son who needs protecting. The words landed like bullets. Gideon flinched, the truth of them cutting deeper than any knife. Jackson cleared his throat. Kid's got a point, boss. Sometimes you've got to break rules to enforce them. And if anyone asks, we were all here playing cards, didn't know a thing about what happened in town. You're supposed to be the voice of reason, Gideon said weakly. I'm the voice of getting things done. Jackson stood. I'll drive them in. Make sure nobody sees the wagon. If anything goes wrong, I'll create a distraction. Gideon looked at his son, at Claire, at the ledgers spread across his desk, at the impossible choice between protecting Eli and trusting him, between playing it safe and actually winning. Finally, he spoke, his voice rough. You follow Jackson's lead. You do exactly what he says. And if anything feels wrong, you leave immediately. Understood? Eli's face transformed with shocked joy. Yes, sir. And Eli? Gideon moved to his son, placed both hands on his shoulders. You're not broken. You never were. I'm sorry it took me so long to say it. Eli's eyes filled, but he blinked the tears back. We'll get the proof, I promise. They left an hour later, Jackson driving the wagon with the lamps extinguished, moving through the darkness like ghosts. Claire sat beside Eli in the back, her stomach churning with fear and adrenaline. This was insane. They were going to get caught, get arrested, make everything worse. But when she looked at Eli's fierce determination, at the way he'd fought for the right to help protect her, she couldn't regret it. They reached town just after 4, that dead hour when even the saloons were quiet. Jackson pulled the wagon into an alley behind Vivian's office, a narrow 2-story building sandwiched between the bank and a lawyer's office. Second floor, Jackson whispered. Fire escape goes up the back. Window should be unlocked. Most people don't lock second-story windows in a town this small. And if it is locked? Claire asked. Jackson handed her a small pry bar. Then you make it unlocked. You've got an hour before sunrise. Get in, find what you need, get out. Claire helped Eli out of the wagon. The fire escape was rusty, the stairs narrow and steep. It took them 10 careful minutes to climb, Eli hauling himself up with his arms while Claire carried his crutches. By the time they reached the window, they were both breathing hard. The window was unlocked. They slipped inside what appeared to be Vivian's private office, moonlight filtering through the curtains to illuminate a desk, filing cabinets, a safe in the corner. Everything was meticulously organized, not a paper out of place. Where do we start? Eli whispered. The safe. If she's hiding something, it'll be there. Claire moved to it, her heart sinking when she saw the combination lock. I don't suppose you know how to crack a safe? No, but I know how to think like someone who doesn't want to forget combinations. Eli scanned the room, then moved to the desk. He pulled open the top drawer, found a leather-bound appointments book. People write things down. They just disguise them. He flipped through pages, found a notation on February 3rd, the date the first cattle went missing, a series of numbers that looked like they might be a time. Try this. 4:15:28. Claire spun the dial. Nothing. Tried it backwards. Still nothing. Other way around, Eli suggested. 28:15:4. The safe clicked open. Inside were ledgers, real ledgers, showing actual tallies and sales. Claire pulled them out with shaking hands, flipped through pages of evidence. Cattle sold to a buyer in Tucson, payments deposited to an account under Vivian's name. Manifests showing counts that matched Gideon's private records, proving the office copies had been altered. Correspondence with the buyer, negotiating prices for surplus stock that was anything but surplus. This is it, Claire breathed. This is everything we need. Then let's take it and go. They were halfway to the window when they heard footsteps on the stairs outside. Claire's blood froze. Someone was coming. At 4:30 in the morning, someone was walking up to Vivian's office. Hide, she mouthed to Eli.
They pressed themselves into the corner behind a filing cabinet, hardly daring to breathe. A key scraped in the lock. The door opened. Vivian Ashford walked in, carrying a carpet bag and a lamp. She went straight to the safe, her back to them. Then she stopped, turned slowly. The safe door was still open. For one horrible second, they all stared at each other. Then Vivian smiled, cold and terrible. "Well, how convenient. Now I don't have to manufacture evidence of your guilt. Breaking and entering should do nicely." She moved for the door, clearly intending to lock them in and call the sheriff. Claire didn't think. She threw herself forward, slamming into Vivian with all her weight. They went down in a tangle of skirts and fury, the lamp crashing to the floor. Oil spilled across the wooden boards. "Run!" Claire shouted at Eli. "Get Jackson!" But Eli didn't run. He grabbed his crutch and swung it hard, catching Vivian across the shoulder as she tried to rise. The woman shrieked, rage transforming her face into something ugly and vicious. "You little cripple!" That's when the oil caught fire. Flames raced across the floor, feeding on the spilled fuel, catching the edge of the curtains. Smoke filled the room in seconds, thick and choking. Claire scrambled to her feet, grabbed Eli's arm. "Move! Now!" They stumbled toward the window, coughing, eyes streaming. Behind them, Vivian screamed something incoherent, lost in the smoke. Claire got Eli through the window first, then grabbed the ledgers, the precious evidence, and followed. The fire escape shook under their combined weight as they descended as fast as Eli could manage. Jackson appeared at the bottom, his face wild with fear, and helped Eli down the last few feet. "What the hell happened?" "Fire! Vivian's still up there." Claire coughed, her lungs burning. Above them, Vivian appeared at the window, her face blackened with smoke, her expression murderous. "You did this! You burned my office! I'll see you hang for this!" "You broke into your own office and knocked over your own lamp," Jackson called back. "We've been at the ranch all night, got witnesses." People were appearing in windows, doors opening. Someone was ringing the fire bell. Within minutes, a bucket brigade had formed, men shouting and running with water from the trough. Jackson hustled Claire and Eli into the wagon, threw a canvas over them. "Stay down. Don't move. Don't breathe loud." The wagon lurched into motion, leaving behind the chaos of the fire and Vivian screaming accusations. They made it half a mile before Eli started laughing. Hysterical, exhausted, triumphant laughter that was half sobs. "We did it," he gasped. "We actually did it." Claire clutched the smoke-stained ledgers to her chest, her heart still hammering. They'd done it. They had the proof. But they'd also just committed a crime, started a fire, and given Vivian Ashford a very legitimate reason to destroy them. This wasn't over. It was just beginning. Dawn was breaking over the ranch when they arrived, painting the sky in shades of copper and gold that mocked the chaos they'd left behind. Gideon was waiting on the porch, his face drawn with worry that transformed into relief and then fury as they climbed down from the wagon. "You're covered in soot," he said, his voice tight. "What happened?" Jackson shot Claire and Eli a warning look before answering. "Slight complication. We got the ledgers, but Miss Ashford showed up unexpected. There was a scuffle. Lamp got knocked over." "You started a fire?" Gideon's voice climbed an octave. "Technically, Vivian started it when she came at us," Eli said. His face was streaked with smoke, his clothes filthy, but his eyes blazed with defiant pride. "But we got out. And we got these." He held up the ledgers like a trophy. Gideon took them with shaking hands, flipped through pages of evidence that told a story of systematic theft and deception. His expression darkened with each entry, the muscle in his jaw jumping. "This is everything. Dates, amounts, the buyer in Tucson." He looked up. "But if there was a fire, Vivian's going to say you two broke in and started it to cover your tracks." "She already did," Claire said wearily. "Screamed it to half the town while we were leaving." "Perfect. So now instead of having evidence of her crimes, we've committed several crimes ourselves and handed her the moral high ground." Gideon set the ledgers down with controlled force. "What were you thinking?" "We were thinking that we needed proof and we found it," Eli shot back. "Would you rather we let her get away with stealing from you? I'd rather you not risk getting arrested for arson." We didn't commit arson. She knocked over her own lamp trying to attack us. Can you prove that? Gideon's question hung in the air, unanswered. Because right now, it's your word against hers, and she's the respectable businesswoman while you're... He stopped, but the damage was done. While I'm the crippled kid and the desperate widow, Eli finished, his voice flat. That's what you were going to say. That's what a jury will see. The truth of it settled over them like ash. Claire thought about Harold Pritchard and his mortgage, about the way the town saw her, a woman clinging to the edges of survival, willing to do anything to escape her debts. And Eli, brilliant and fierce, but marked by his disability as someone to be pitied rather than trusted. Then we don't take it to a jury, Jackson said. We take it to the people who actually got robbed, the Forts, the mining camps, the buyers who paid Vivian for cattle they never received or received in short numbers. Let them demand justice. And how do we do that without admitting we stole these ledgers? Gideon asked. Margaret appeared in the doorway, took one look at the soot-covered trio, and sighed. You're all going to need baths and food before you do anything else. Can't think straight when you're exhausted and filthy. Margaret, we don't have time. You have exactly enough time to clean up and eat breakfast. Her tone brooked no argument. Because when Sheriff Morrison arrives, and he will arrive probably within the hour, you need to look like respectable people who've been home all night, not criminals fleeing a crime scene. She was right. They scattered to wash and change, moving with the desperate efficiency of soldiers preparing for battle. Claire scrubbed smoke from her skin and hair, changed into her plainest dress, pinned her hair back severely. When she looked in the mirror, she saw a respectable widow. No one would believe that woman had climbed through a second-story window and fought Vivian Ashford in a burning building. She hoped. Sheriff Morrison arrived just after 7, his weathered face grim. He was a man in his 50s who moved with the deliberate caution of someone who'd seen every kind of trouble humanity could devise and wasn't eager to see more. Gideon, he said, touching his hat brim, I need to ask you some questions about last night. Of course. Coffee? They settled in the parlor, a civilized gathering that would have been laughable if Claire's future wasn't hanging in the balance. The sheriff accepted a cup from Margaret, took a long sip, then pulled out a notepad. Miss Ashford's office burned last night. Most of the building's a loss, though they got it under control before it spread to the bank next door. He paused. She's claiming Mrs. Dawson and young Eli broke in around 4:30 this morning and set the fire to destroy evidence of Mrs. Dawson's theft from this ranch. That's absurd, Gideon said flatly. Claire and Eli were here all night. We were all up late working on the ranch accounts. Can anyone corroborate that? I can, Jackson said from the doorway. We were playing cards until near dawn. Mrs. Dawson cleaned me out of 2 months' wages. The sheriff's eyebrows rose. You play cards, Mrs. Dawson? My late husband taught me. Claire met his gaze steadily, hoping her hands wouldn't shake. I'm quite good. Apparently. Morrison made a note. Still, Miss Ashford was very specific, said she surprised them in her office that Mrs. Dawson attacked her and knocked over a lamp. Then Miss Ashford is mistaken, or lying. Gideon's voice was ice. She's been trying to discredit Claire ever since I rejected her business proposal. This sounds like a continuation of that campaign. What business proposal? She wanted to formalize our professional relationship into a personal one. I declined. She took it poorly. Gideon pulled out Vivian's ledgers, the ones she'd left at the ranch, not the incriminating ones from the safe. She's been spreading accusations that Claire is somehow responsible for missing cattle, when the real discrepancies started months before Claire arrived. Morrison flipped through the pages, his frown deepening. These show losses starting in February. Exactly. 4 months before Mrs. Dawson came to work here. But Miss Ashford claimed the theft started in June, conveniently matching Claire's arrival. Gideon's jaw was set. I think Miss Ashford realized I was getting close to discovering her own involvement in the cattle losses and decided to frame someone else before I could act. That's a serious accusation. As serious as accusing an innocent woman of theft and arson. Gideon leaned forward. Sheriff, I've known you 15 years. You know I don't make claims I can't back up. Something's wrong with the cattle tallies, and Vivian Ashford is right in the middle of it.
But instead of letting me investigate properly, she's trying to destroy Mrs. Dawson's reputation and credibility. Morrison was quiet for a long moment, studying Gideon's face. Then he turned to Claire. Mrs. Dawson, where were you between 4 and 5 this morning? Right here, in the dining room, losing at cards. The lie came easier than it should have. Claire thought of Eli risking everything to help her, of the evidence that could save them all if only they could figure out how to use it. You can ask Margaret. She brought us coffee around 4:30. That's right, Margaret said from the doorway. Nearly burned myself carrying the pot because Mr. Eli made me laugh with some joke about Jackson's poker face. The sheriff made more notes, his expression unreadable.
I'll need to verify with Miss Ashford's neighbors, see if anyone saw anything. But I'll be honest, Gideon, this doesn't sit right with me. The timing, the accusations, it feels personal, not criminal. That's because it is personal, Gideon said. A woman scorned trying to burn down anything that reminds her she was rejected. Morrison stood, tucked his notepad away. I'll be in touch. Mrs. Dawson, don't leave town without telling me first. I won't. Claire's voice was steady despite the fear clawing at her throat. When the sheriff was gone, the silence in the parlor was suffocating. They'd survived the first wave. But Vivian wouldn't stop. She'd push harder, dig deeper, find some crack in their story, and exploit it. We can't just sit here waiting for her next move, Eli said, breaking the silence. We have the real ledgers. We have proof she's the thief. We need to use it. Without admitting how we got it, Gideon reminded him.
What if we didn't get it? Jackson said slowly. What if someone else did? Someone who had legitimate access to Vivian's office and legitimate concerns about her business practices? Who would that be? Claire asked. Me. A new voice spoke from the doorway. They all turned to find a man in an expensive suit, his face weathered but refined, his eyes sharp behind wire-rimmed spectacles. Theodore Ashford, Vivian's husband. The room erupted in shocked silence. Her what? Gideon finally managed. Husband, or ex-husband, depending on which state you're asking in. Theodore moved into the room with the careful precision of a lawyer or banker. We married in Denver 12 years ago. Divorced, or so I thought, 8 years ago when I discovered she'd been embezzling from my investment firm. She disappeared before I could press charges, and I'd assumed she'd moved far enough away that I'd never hear from her again. How did you find her? Claire asked. I didn't, you did.
Theodore pulled out a newspaper clipping. The story about the fire at Vivian's office with her name prominently featured. I make it a habit to scan newspapers from territories where women of Vivian's talents might resettle. When I saw her name, I took the first train west. Why? Gideon's voice was suspicious. Because Vivian left me financially ruined. She stole nearly $50,000 before disappearing. I've spent 8 years rebuilding my life and my reputation. Theodore's smile was thin, hard. When I saw she'd set up another scheme targeting another wealthy man, I decided it was time she answered for at least one of her crimes. Jackson whistled low. 50,000, that's a fortune. Yes. Theodore's gaze fixed on the smoke-stained ledgers still sitting on the side table. And unless I'm mistaken, those are account books that don't match the story Vivian's been telling. Gideon and Claire exchanged glances. This could be a trap, or it could be salvation. What do you want from us? Gideon asked carefully. Cooperation. You give me access to your ranch records, your contracts with Vivian, anything that shows her pattern of theft. I'll give you sworn testimony about her history, proof that this isn't her first time defrauding a business partner. Together, we build a case strong enough that a judge has no choice but to issue a warrant for her arrest. And how do we explain having ledgers from her private safe? Claire asked. Theodore's smile sharpened. You don't. I do. As her legal husband, the divorce was never finalized in Colorado, which means it's not valid. I have every right to access her business records, especially when I have reason to believe she's engaged in criminal activity. He paused. Of course, I'd need someone to tell me where to find those records, and it would be unfortunate if that someone had, say, visited her office recently. But if we tell you where they are, we're admitting we broke in, Eli said. Not if you simply suggest where a concerned husband might look for evidence of wrongdoing. You're not confessing to a crime. You're providing information to someone with legal standing to investigate his wife's business affairs. Theodore pulled out a card, set it on the table. Think about it. You can try to fight Vivian on your own, with stolen evidence and no legal standing, or you can let me do it properly, with the law on our side. He left before anyone could respond, his card gleaming white against the dark wood of the table. It's too convenient, Gideon said after Theodore was gone. A wronged husband shows up right when we need one? Or it's justice finally catching up with someone who's been running cons for over a decade, Jackson countered. Boss, we're out of good options. This might be our only chance. He's right, Claire said quietly. Vivian's going to push until she destroys me, and possibly Eli. We can't fight her in court with evidence we stole. But Theodore can. What if he's working with her? What if this is all some elaborate scheme to get their hands on those ledgers so they can destroy them? Then we make copies first, Eli said. I'll transcribe every page. If Theodore betrays us, we still have the information, just not the original evidence. Gideon looked at his son with something approaching awe. When did you get so strategic? I learned from you. Eli's smile was small but genuine. You always say never put all your cattle in one corral. It took Eli 2 days to copy every entry from the ledgers, his hand cramping from the hours of careful transcription. Claire helped verify the numbers, double-checking dates and amounts while Gideon met with Theodore to review the ranch's financial records and contracts with Vivian. On the third day, Theodore returned with a warrant signed by a territorial judge, authorizing the search of Vivian Ashford's business premises and personal property for evidence of fraud and embezzlement. The judge was very interested in my testimony about Vivian's history, Theodore said with grim satisfaction. Apparently, a pattern of defrauding business partners carries weight, even in frontier courts. They found Vivian at the boarding house where she'd taken a room after the fire. She answered the door in a silk dressing gown, her face carefully composed until she saw Theodore standing beside the sheriff. The color drained from her face. What are you doing here? Hello, darling. We need to talk about that divorce you think we got. Theodore's smile was predatory. Turns out it was never finalized, which means I'm still your husband, which means I have access to all your business records. You have no right. I have every right. He held up the warrant. Sheriff Morrison is here to ensure everything's done properly. We'll be searching this room and any other property you've claimed in Copper Ridge. This is harassment. Vivian's composure cracked. Gideon, you put him up to this. You and that scheming widow. Mrs. Dawson has nothing to do with this, Theodore interrupted. This is between you and me. Between a woman who stole $50,000 from her husband and the law that's finally caught up with her. The search didn't take long. They found more ledgers hidden in a trunk under Vivian's bed, showing payments from the Tucson buyer that matched the amounts in the ledgers from her office safe. They found bank statements in a false name, showing deposits that coincided perfectly with the missing cattle sales. And they found letters from the buyer explicitly discussing the surplus stock he'd been purchasing at below-market rates. You have to understand, Vivian said as Sheriff Morrison prepared to take her into custody, her voice desperate now, all pretense dropped. I was building something, a real business, a real life. And then Gideon rejected me for some penniless widow who doesn't know anything about running a ranch. It wasn't fair. So you decided to steal from him? Theodore's voice was cold. To frame an innocent woman? To destroy a child's trust in his father? I was going to use the money to start over somewhere new, somewhere I could finally be someone who mattered. Vivian's eyes filled with tears that might have been genuine. You don't know what it's like, being a woman in a man's world, having to fight for every scrap of respect, every ounce of authority. I deserve better than what I got. You deserved exactly what you got, Claire said, speaking for the first time. You had opportunities. You had choices. And you chose to steal and lie and hurt people rather than do the hard work of earning what you wanted honestly. Vivian's gaze fixed on her, hatred burning through the tears. You think you've won. You think you'll just slide into my place, become the next Mrs. Cross, live happily in that big house. But you won't, because people like you don't get happy endings. You're broken, and he's broken, and that crippled boy is broken. You're all just broken pieces trying to pretend you fit together. That's enough, Sheriff Morrison said, taking Vivian's arm. Miss Ashford, you're under arrest for theft, fraud, and conspiracy to commit fraud. You have the right to defend yourself before a judge. They led her away, still protesting, still throwing accusations over her shoulder like knives. Claire watched her go and felt nothing but exhaustion. It was over. Finally, over. Or so she thought. That afternoon, Harold Pritchard appeared at the ranch, his narrow face pinched with disappointment. Mrs. Dawson, I heard about the arrest. Quite the scandal. Is there something you need, Mr. Pritchard? Claire kept her voice level despite the instinct to throw him off the property. Your store note comes due in 2 weeks. I wanted to confirm you'd be making the payment as agreed. His smile was all false sympathy. I understand you've been occupied with other matters, but business is business. $700. In all the chaos with Vivian, Claire had almost forgotten about the debt that had driven her to accept Gideon's offer in the first place. She'd been paid for 2 months' work, had saved every penny, but she was still short by nearly $400. I'll have it, she said, with more confidence than she felt. Will you? Because I've heard rumors you might be leaving Copper Ridge, taking up more permanent residence at Cross Ranch. Harold's gaze was knowing, calculating. If you're abandoning the store, the debt transfers to your personal assets, which means I can claim whatever property you have to settle the account. The store isn't abandoned. I'm working to pay the mortgage. But you're not working at the store. You're working here for Mr. Cross, which means the store isn't generating revenue, which means you can't possibly make the payment. He pulled out papers. I've taken the liberty of drawing up foreclosure documents. If you can't pay in full on August 15th, the property reverts to the bank. That's not legal? Oh, but it is. You signed a note saying you'd maintain the business as a going concern. Closing it for months to work elsewhere violates the terms. Harold's smile widened. Of course, if you wanted to make other arrangements, if you wanted to sell me the property now for, say, $300, we could settle this amicably. $300 for a store worth at least $2,000. Robbery dressed in legal language. Get off this property, Gideon said, appearing in the doorway with an expression that could have frozen fire. And don't come back unless you want to explain to a judge why you're trying to defraud a widow. I'm not defrauding anyone. I'm simply enforcing a legal contract. By offering pennies on the dollar for valuable property, that's called predatory lending, Pritchard, and judges don't look kindly on it. Gideon moved to stand beside Claire, his presence solid and protective. Mrs. Dawson will make her payment on time and in full. And then you'll release the note and never darken her door again. With what money? You going to pay it for her? Harold's eyebrows rose. Because that would be very interesting, Mr. Cross. Very interesting indeed. People might start to wonder what exactly Mrs. Dawson's been doing to earn such generosity. The implication hung in the air like poison. Claire felt her face flame, but before she could respond, Eli's voice cut through the tension. She's been teaching me, managing the household accounts, helping father with ranch correspondence. He appeared beside his father, leaning on his crutches, his young face set with adult determination. I'd be happy to provide a detailed list of her work and its value to this operation, Mr. Pritchard. I'm very good with numbers. Very thorough. I could probably calculate her worth down to the penny. The threat was subtle but clear. Eli was offering to document everything Claire had done, which would show she'd more than earned her salary through legitimate work. Harold's smile faltered. That won't be necessary. I'm sure Mrs. Dawson and I can reach an understanding. We already have an understanding, Claire said, finding her voice. I'll pay the $700 on August 15th, in full, and then we'll never speak again. Oh, we'll see. Harold left, but his parting look promised this wasn't over. When he was gone, Claire sank into a chair, the weight of everything crashing down on her. Vivian in custody, her store mortgage coming due. Harold Pritchard circling like a vulture. And underneath it all, the complicated, terrifying feeling she'd been trying to ignore every time Gideon looked at her like she mattered. I don't have the money, she said quietly. I'm $400 short. I'll loan it to you, Gideon said immediately. No. Claire's voice was firm. I won't be in debt to you. That's exactly what Harold wants, evidence that our relationship is something other than professional. Then let me buy the store, for fair value. You can use the money to pay off Pritchard and still have capital left over. And what would you do with a general store in town? Run it, or hire someone to run it, or turn it into something else. Gideon crouched beside her chair, his storm cloud eyes intent. Claire, I don't care about the store. I care about not letting Harold Pritchard destroy you because you had the audacity to help my son. I can't accept charity. It's not charity, it's business. He stood, began pacing. You have an asset. I have capital. We make a transaction that benefits both of us. You're free of debt. I get property in town that might prove useful. Simple. Nothing about this is simple. Claire looked at Eli, who was watching the exchange with knowing eyes. People already talk. If Gideon buys my store, if I stay at this ranch, everyone will assume. Let them assume, Eli said. Who cares what people think? I do, and your father should. Claire stood, faced Gideon directly. You're one of the most powerful men in the territory. Your reputation matters, and if people think I'm here for anything other than honest work, it damages both of us. Then marry him, Eli said. The words dropped into the room like stones into still water. Eli, Gideon said, his voice strangled. I'm serious. You both care about each other. Everyone can see it except apparently you two, so make it official. Marry her, father. Buy the store as a wedding gift. Then Pritchard can't say anything, and neither can anyone else. The silence that followed was deafening. Claire stared at Eli, at his earnest face and matter-of-fact tone, as if he'd just suggested something as simple as buying cattle or planting corn. That's not, Gideon started. It's not a terrible idea, Jackson said from the doorway. Everyone jumped. Nobody had heard him approach. Solves the money problem, solves the reputation problem, and it's not like you two are exactly hiding how you feel. We're not, Claire began. You're not obvious? Margaret appeared beside Jackson, arms crossed. Please. The way you look at each other, the way you find excuses to be in the same room, the way you both light up when the other walks in. Everyone on this ranch knows. This is insane, Gideon said. You can't just decide to get married because it's convenient. Why not? Eli challenged. People get married for lots of reasons. Business, alliances, property. At least you two actually like each other. It's more than like, Margaret said gently. Anyone with eyes can see that. Claire's heart was hammering. This was madness. They couldn't possibly. She couldn't possibly. But when she looked at Gideon, saw the way he was looking back at her, conflicted, terrified, hopeful, she realized everyone else was right. She was in love with him. Somewhere between standing up to him in her store and standing beside him through Vivian's betrayal, between reading to his son and learning the rhythms of his ranch, she'd fallen completely and irrevocably in love with Gideon Cross. And unless she was completely misreading things, he felt the same way. This is crazy, she whispered. Yes, Gideon agreed. He moved closer, his hand coming up to cup her face with surprising gentleness. Completely crazy. People will say I trapped you, that I manipulated this whole situation. Let them say it. I know the truth. His thumb brushed across her cheekbone. Claire, I'm not proposing because it's convenient. I'm proposing because I can't imagine this house without you in it, because my son hasn't smiled this much in years, because when I think about my future, you're in every version of it that matters. That's the exhaustion talking. We've barely slept in days. It's the clarity talking. Sometimes it takes a crisis to show you what actually matters. He lowered his forehead to rest against hers. Marry me, not because of Pritchard or the store or what anyone will think. Marry me because you want to. Because this feels right. Claire closed her eyes, breathing in the scent of him, leather and sage and home. This was insane. They'd known each other barely 2 months. She'd come here to save her store, not find a husband. But somewhere along the way, she'd found a family. A son who needed her wisdom, a man who needed her strength, a home that needed her warmth. And she needed them just as desperately. Yes, she heard herself say. Yes, I'll marry you. Eli whooped. Margaret burst into tears. Jackson laughed, long and relieved. And Gideon kissed her, soft and sweet and full of promise, while the Arizona sun poured through the windows and painted everything gold. They were married 3 days later in the parlor of Cross Ranch,
with the territorial judge officiating and half the ranch hands crowded into the room as witnesses. Claire wore a simple blue dress that Margaret had altered to fit her, and Gideon wore his best suit with a wildflower boutonniere that Eli had insisted on pinning to his lapel.
The ceremony lasted less than 10 minutes, but when Gideon slipped a gold band onto Claire's finger, his mother's ring, Eli whispered, tears in his eyes. It felt like the most binding vow she'd ever made. Harold Pritchard learned about the marriage when Gideon walked into the bank the following morning and paid off Claire's mortgage in full, $700 in cash counted out with deliberate precision. "Consider this a wedding gift to my wife," Gideon said, his voice carrying to every corner of the bank. "She won't be needing credit from this institution anymore." Harold's face went through several shades of purple before settling on a sickly gray. "This is highly irregular." "What's irregular is a banker trying to foreclose on a widow for pennies on the dollar." Gideon leaned across the desk, his storm cloud eyes hard. "My wife and I will be reviewing all our business relationships in the coming months. I suggest you remember that Cross Ranch represents a significant portion of this bank's deposits. It would be unfortunate if we decided to move our accounts elsewhere." The threat was polite but unmistakable. Harold stammered something about misunderstandings and business practices, but Gideon had already turned to leave, the mortgage papers tucked safely under his arm. Claire was waiting outside, and when he handed her the papers, marked paid in full, she had to blink back tears. "The store is yours again," he said simply, "free and clear. What you do with it is your choice." She looked at the documents, at proof that she was finally free of the debt that had haunted her for 3 years. Then she looked at the man who'd given her that freedom without asking for anything in return except the chance to love her. "I want to reopen it," she said, "but not run it myself. I want to hire someone from town who needs work, someone who understands what it's like to struggle." That Gideon's smile was warm, proud. "That's a fine idea." They found their candidate that afternoon. Sarah Mitchell was a widow like Claire, younger, but no less weathered by life's hardships. Her husband had died in a mining accident, leaving her with 3 children and no way to support them. She'd been taking in laundry and mending to survive, her hands cracked and raw from lye soap. When Claire offered her the position as store manager with a salary that would actually feed her family and a room above the store where she could live rent-free, Sarah wept into her apron. "I don't understand," she said when she could speak. "Why would you do this for me?" "Because someone did it for me when I needed it most," Claire said, glancing at Gideon, "and because every woman deserves a chance to rebuild her life with dignity." Sarah proved to be shrewd and hardworking, with a head for numbers and a way with customers that had the store turning a profit within weeks. She kept meticulous records and sent them to Claire monthly, along with letters detailing her children's progress in school and her gratitude for the opportunity. Vivian's trial was held in late September, when the desert heat had finally broken and the air carried the first whisper of autumn. Theodore testified about the Denver theft, presenting bank records and correspondence that painted a portrait of systematic fraud. Jackson testified about the missing cattle and the discrepancies in the tallies. And Claire testified about Vivian's attempts to frame her, though she carefully avoided any mention of how the ledgers from the safe had actually been obtained. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours before returning a verdict of guilty on all counts. The judge sentenced Vivian to 10 years in the territorial prison, with restitution to be paid to both Gideon and Theodore from any assets she still possessed. As the sheriff led her away in shackles, Vivian looked back at Claire one last time. "You think you've won everything," she said, her voice empty of the charm and calculation that had defined her. "But you're just living in the space I carved out. Without me, he never would have looked twice at you." "You're wrong," Claire said quietly. "He looked at me because I saw his son as a person, not a problem. You could have had everything you wanted if you'd been willing to build it honestly. But you chose shortcuts and lies. That's why you lost, Vivian, not because of me." Vivian had no answer to that. She turned away, and Claire watched her disappear into custody with something that felt less like triumph and more like sadness for all the wasted potential. Life at Cross Ranch settled into a new rhythm after that. Claire had expected becoming Gideon's wife to change everything, but in many ways it simply made official what had already been true. She still worked with Eli in the library every morning, still helped Margaret with the household accounts, still stood on the porch in the evenings watching the sun set over the valley. The difference was that now Gideon would come up behind her, wrap his arms around her waist, and rest his chin on her shoulder like he had every right to hold her, like she was something precious he'd been given and refused to take for granted. "What are you thinking about?" he asked one evening, about a month after the wedding. "How strange life is. 3 months ago I was counting pennies and wondering if I'd lose everything. Now I'm standing here in a home I never imagined having, married to a man I barely knew existed." She leaned back against his chest. "It feels like someone else's life." "Does it feel like a good life?" She turned in his arms, looked up at his face, still weathered, still hard in places, but softer now around the eyes when he looked at her. "It feels like the life I was supposed to have all along. I just didn't know it until I found it." He kissed her then, slow and sweet, and Claire thought about how mercy looked like a crippled boy collapsing in the street, and how salvation looked like a chance to help someone without expecting anything in return. How the best things in life came from the moments when you stopped protecting yourself and started protecting others. Eli flourished in the months that followed. Gideon began including him in ranch business decisions, asking his opinion on contracts and market prices. The boy had an instinct for numbers and patterns that rivaled any trained accountant, and more than once his analysis saved the ranch from bad deals or poor investments. But it was his work with the ranch hands that truly transformed him. Eli started teaching the younger workers to read and calculate, holding informal classes in the bunkhouse after dinner. Men who'd grown up without education learned to sign their names, to figure their wages, to read the contracts they signed. And in teaching them, Eli found a purpose that had nothing to do with what his legs could or couldn't do. "I want to build a school," he told Claire and Gideon one evening at dinner. He'd been sketching in his notebook plans and elevations that showed a small building with large windows and a covered porch. Not just for ranch children, but for anyone within riding distance. Workers' kids, farmers' kids, anyone who wants to learn. "That's ambitious," Gideon said, but his tone was considering, not dismissive. "It's necessary. Half the people in this territory can't read. They sign contracts they don't understand, take loans with terms they can't calculate. Knowledge is power, Father. You've always said that about cattle markets and land prices. Why shouldn't it be true for people too?" Claire felt her throat tighten. This boy who'd been lying in the dust 3 months ago, dismissed and overlooked, was now proposing to build something that would outlast all of them. "How much would it cost?" Gideon asked. Eli flipped to another page, showing detailed cost estimates. Construction, materials, furniture, books, and a year's salary for a teacher, about $3,000, assuming we use ranch labor for the building. $3,000 was significant, but not devastating for Cross Ranch. Gideon studied the numbers, then looked at his son, really looked at him, seeing not the disability but the brilliant, compassionate young man he was becoming. "On one condition," Gideon said. "What's that?" "You help design the curriculum. You know what people need to learn because you've been teaching them. So you work with whoever we hire to make sure the school actually serves the community, not just some Eastern idea of education." Eli's face transformed with joy so pure it hurt to witness. "Yes, sir. I can do that." "I know you can." Gideon's voice was rough with emotion. "I'm proud of you, son. Your mother would be proud too." The school broke ground in November, when the heat had mellowed enough to make construction bearable. Gideon donated the land and materials. The ranch hands volunteered their labor, working weekends and evenings to raise the walls and frame the roof. Women from town donated books and slates and chalk. Even Sarah Mitchell at the general store organized a fundraiser, selling baked goods and preserves with proceeds going toward school supplies. The entire territory seemed to catch the fever of possibility. This wasn't just a school. It was proof that things could be different, that people who'd been dismissed and overlooked could build something meaningful. Claire found herself drawn into the planning despite having no formal teaching experience. She helped organize the donated books by subject and reading level, worked with Eli to develop lesson plans that would serve students ranging from 6 to 60, and interviewed candidates for the teaching position. They hired a woman named Ruth Carson, a former teacher from Missouri who'd come west for her health and settled in Tucson. She was 50, sharp-minded, and possessed of the particular brand of no-nonsense compassion that good teachers cultivate. When she met Eli and heard his vision for the school, she declared him the finest educator she'd ever met, who'd never officially taught a day in his life. Intelligence isn't about credentials, she told Claire. It's about curiosity, discipline, and the willingness to see connections others miss. Your son has all three in abundance. He's my stepson, Claire corrected automatically, then stopped, because that wasn't quite right either. Eli might not be her son by blood, but he was hers in every way that mattered. She'd fought for him, taught him, stood beside him when he needed an ally. That made her his mother more surely than biology ever could. He's your son, Ruth said firmly. Any fool can see that. The school opened in February, a year after the cattle thefts had begun, and 9 months after Claire had first arrived at Cross Ranch. They held a dedication ceremony on a bright Saturday morning with what seemed like half the territory in attendance. Families came from ranches 20 miles away, some traveling for days to be present for the opening. Gideon gave a brief speech about the importance of education and opportunity, but it was Eli who brought the crowd to tears. "A year ago, I thought my life didn't matter," he said, standing on the schoolhouse steps without his crutches, braced against the doorframe for support, but refusing to hide his disability. "I thought because I couldn't rope cattle or break horses, I had nothing to contribute. But a woman I barely knew taught me that worth isn't measured by what your body can do. It's measured by what your heart chooses to build." He looked at Claire, his eyes bright. "This school exists because someone believed I was worth saving when I was lying in the street, because someone fought for me when it would have been easier to look away, because someone taught me that the greatest power we have is the power to lift others up. So this school is for everyone who's ever been told they don't matter. Everyone who's been dismissed because of their circumstances or their limitations or their lack of opportunity. Come here, learn, build something that matters. Prove them all wrong." The applause that followed shook the building's new walls. Claire wiped tears from her face, not bothering to hide them. Beside her, Gideon's hand found hers and squeezed tight. "You did this," he murmured. "You changed everything." "We did this," she corrected. "All of us. Together." The school filled quickly, with students ranging from 6-year-old ranch children learning their letters to 40-year-old cowboys learning to write their names. Ruth proved to be a gifted teacher, patient and demanding in equal measure. And Eli became her assistant, helping students who struggled with mathematics and reading with them during lunch breaks when they needed extra support. Cross Ranch prospered in ways that had nothing to do with cattle prices or land values. The school became a gathering place for the community, hosting meetings and socials and celebrations. Workers who'd learned to read negotiated better contracts. Children who'd had no prospects beyond manual labor began dreaming of different futures. The territory itself seemed to shift, becoming less about individual survival and more about collective possibility. Harold Pritchard left Copper Ridge in disgrace after an audit revealed he'd been engaging in predatory lending practices with multiple borrowers. The bank replaced him with a manager from Phoenix who actually believed in supporting local businesses rather than consuming them. Sarah Mitchell eventually bought Claire's store outright, paying a fair price over 2 years, and renamed it Mitchell's General Store with a sign painted by her eldest daughter. Theodore Ashford recovered most of his losses from Vivian's assets and returned to Denver, but not before ensuring that the case files were made public record. Other victims of Vivian's schemes came forward, adding their testimonies to the pile. She would likely never see freedom again, and while Claire couldn't find it in herself to celebrate that, she also couldn't mourn it. Some people chose destruction. You could only protect so many people from the consequences of those choices. 2 years after Claire had first arrived at Cross Ranch, she stood in the school watching Eli teach a class of teenagers about compound interest and loan calculations. He was 14 now, taller and stronger, his confidence blooming like desert flowers after rain. He still walked with a limp, still needed his crutches for long distances, but he moved through the world like someone who knew his worth couldn't be measured by the straightness of his spine or the strength of his legs. "You're staring," Gideon said, appearing beside her with the silent grace he'd never lost despite years of ranching. "I'm proud. There's a difference." She leaned into him, comfortable with the casual affection that had become their language. "Look at him. Look at what he's built. Look at what we all built." Gideon's arm came around her shoulders. Though I'll admit, the boy's got vision that puts mine to shame. Last week, he proposed expanding the school to include vocational training, carpentry, blacksmithing, animal husbandry. Said people need practical skills as much as they need reading.
What did you tell him? That he should draw up a proposal with cost estimates and present it to the ranch foreman. If they think it's viable, we'll consider it. Gideon's smile was fond. He had the proposal on my desk the next morning, detailed, thorough, and completely feasible. The boy's going to change this territory before he's 20. He already has. Claire watched Eli answer a student's question with patience and clarity, breaking down complex concepts into understandable pieces. We all have. They stood together in the doorway, watching the future take shape in a classroom full of students who'd been given a chance they might never have had otherwise. And Claire thought about the strange path that had brought her here, from a failing store and crushing debt to standing beside a man she loved, mothering a son who'd become her heart, building something that would outlast all of them. That evening, after dinner, the three of them sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the desert in impossible colors. It had become their ritual, this quiet hour where they simply existed together without needing to fill the silence with words. "I've been thinking," Eli said, breaking the comfortable quiet. "About Mother." Gideon stiffened slightly. He still found it hard to talk about his first wife, though the grief had softened over time into something gentler. "What about her?" Claire asked. "I used to think keeping her memory alive meant keeping everything exactly as it was when she died. The library, the roses she planted, even the way Father ran the ranch." Eli looked at Gideon. "But I don't think that's what she would have wanted. I think she'd want us to grow, to change, to build new things." "She would," Gideon said quietly. "Your mother believed in moving forward, not standing still." "Then I think we should plant new roses. Different colors, different varieties. Something that honors what she started but isn't trapped by it." Eli's voice was thoughtful. "And I think we should add her name to the school dedication plaque, not as the builder, but as the inspiration. Because she's the one who taught me that books were windows to everywhere I couldn't walk. That mattered." Claire felt tears prick her eyes. This boy, this remarkable young man, was learning to honor the past while embracing the future. It was a lesson many adults never mastered. "I think that's perfect," Gideon said, his voice rough. "She'd be honored." "And Claire should be on the plaque too," Eli added, "as co-founder, because this school wouldn't exist without her." "Eli, that's not—" "It's true." He turned to face her directly. "You saved my life that day in town. Not just my physical life, but everything that makes life worth living. You taught me I mattered. That's what this school is, proof that people matter, that everyone deserves a chance to build something meaningful. That's your lesson, Claire. Your legacy." She couldn't speak past the emotion clogging her throat, so she just reached out and pulled him close, this boy who'd become her son in every way that counted. He hugged her back fiercely, no longer the wary, hurting child she'd found in the street, but a young man who knew he was loved. Gideon watched them with an expression that Claire had learned to recognize as his version of overwhelming emotion, the kind he still struggled to express in words. But she felt it in the way his hand found hers, in the way he drew them both close, creating a circle of warmth against the cooling desert air. They sat like that as the sun disappeared and the stars emerged, brilliant points of light in the vast Arizona darkness. And Claire thought about mercy and redemption, about how the smallest acts of kindness could reshape entire lives, about how families were built not through blood alone but through choice and commitment and the daily decision to show up for each other. She'd come to Copper Ridge a widow, counting pennies, desperate and alone. She'd leave this life, years from now, she hoped, as a woman who'd helped build something that mattered. A school, a family, a community where people lifted each other up instead of tearing each other down. That was worth more than all the cattle in the territory. The years that followed brought their share of challenges and changes. Eli went east for 2 years to study business and education at a university in St. Louis, though he came home every summer to teach at the school and help with the ranch. He returned with new ideas about agricultural science and modern business practices, implementing systems that made Cross Ranch one of the most efficient operations in the territory. He never married, though he had offers. "I'm married to the work,"
he'd say with a smile that suggested he was perfectly content with that choice. And the work was substantial. By the time he was 25, the school had expanded to include the vocational programs he'd envisioned, plus a small lending library and a community meeting hall. Students who'd learned under Ruth Carson's patient instruction went on to become teachers themselves, spreading literacy and opportunity throughout the territory. Claire and Gideon grew old together on the ranch, weathering droughts and economic downturns and all the thousand small crises that came with building a life in the frontier. But they weathered them together, and that made all the difference. Some nights, lying beside him in the darkness, Claire would think about the woman she'd been 3 years ago, desperate, lonely, convinced her best days were behind her. That woman wouldn't recognize the life Claire had now, wouldn't believe that hope could bloom in the desert, that broken things could be mended into something stronger than they'd been whole. On their 10th anniversary, Gideon gave her a gift that made her weep. It was a painting, commissioned from an artist in Tucson, showing the moment they'd first met. Claire kneeling beside Eli in the street, her hand extended in kindness. The scene was rendered in warm desert tones, full of light and possibility. "That's when everything changed," Gideon said, watching her study the painting. "When you chose compassion over convenience, when you saw a boy who needed help and didn't calculate the cost before offering it. I was just doing what anyone would do." "But they don't." His arms came around her from behind, familiar and solid. Most people would have stepped over him. "You knelt down. You brought him water and shelter and dignity. You saved his life, Claire. You saved mine too, though it took me a while to realize it." She turned in his arms, looked up at the face she knew as well as her own. Weathered now, lined with years and wisdom, but still capable of taking her breath away when he looked at her like she was the answer to questions he'd stopped asking. "We saved each other," she said. "That's what love is. Mutual salvation." He kissed her then, soft and deep, and she tasted dust and coffee and devotion. When they finally pulled apart, she saw Eli watching from the doorway with a smile that said he knew exactly how lucky they all were to have found each other. 20 years after that first meeting in the dusty street, Claire stood at the school's anniversary celebration, surrounded by people whose lives had been changed by the opportunity to learn. Former students now teaching their own children, ranch hands who'd become foremen and business owners, women who'd learned to read and write and advocate for themselves in a world that preferred they stay silent. The building had been expanded twice, with new wings added for different subjects and age groups. Ruth Carson had retired and been replaced by one of her former students, a young woman who'd grown up on a struggling farm and now held a teaching certificate from the Territorial Normal School. Eli served as the school's director while still helping manage Cross Ranch, splitting his time between education and agriculture with the same fierce dedication he brought to everything. Claire was 60 now, her hair more silver than brown, her hands showing the wear of decades of work. But when she looked around at the community they'd built, really built, from nothing but need and determination and the willingness to believe people deserved better, she felt young in the ways that mattered. "Speech," someone called from the crowd. Claire shook her head, but Eli was already guiding her to the front, his hand steady on her elbow. He still walked with a limp, still leaned on a cane for long distances, but he moved with the confidence of someone who'd proven his worth 1,000 times over. "I'm not much for speeches," Claire began, and the crowd laughed because everyone knew she could command a room when she chose to. "But I'll say this. 20 years ago, I met a boy who taught me that mercy isn't weakness. It's the strongest thing we have. And everything that's happened since, this school, this community, all of you, is proof that when we choose compassion, we change the world." She looked at Eli, at Gideon standing proud beside their son, at the faces of people she'd known for decades and strangers who'd been drawn to what they were building. "We're not perfect. This place isn't paradise, but it's ours. And we built it together by refusing to accept that some people matter more than others, by insisting that everyone deserves dignity and opportunity and the chance to build something meaningful." She paused, emotion thickening her voice. "So thank you for believing that was possible, for doing the hard work to make it real, for proving that the desert can bloom when we water it with compassion." The applause was thunderous, but what Claire heard beneath it was something deeper. hope, pride. The sound of a community that knew its worth because they'd built it together, brick by brick, student by student, life by transformed life. That night, back in the ranch, Claire stood on the porch one last time watching the stars wheel overhead in their eternal dance. Gideon appeared beside her with 2 cups of coffee, still following the ritual they'd maintained for 2 decades. "Tired?" he asked. "Satisfied," she corrected. "There's a difference." "There is." He handed her a cup, and they stood together in comfortable silence, 2 people who'd learned to speak the language of presence. "Do you ever think about how it all started?" Claire asked. "How one moment of choosing to help someone changed everything?" "Every day." Gideon's hand found hers, their fingers interlacing with the ease of long practice. "I think about how close I came to losing it all because I was too focused on empire building to see what actually mattered, and I thank whatever mercy brought you into our lives when we needed you most." "We needed each other," Claire said. "That's what family is. Not blood or obligation, but mutual need transformed into mutual love." Eli joined them then, carrying his own coffee, settling into the chair he'd claimed as his own years ago. And they sat together as they had thousands of times before, watching the desert night and the distant lights of the school, proof that broken things could be mended and desperate situations could become foundations for joy. Claire closed her eyes and breathed in sage and dust and the peculiar magic of the Arizona frontier. She thought about the widow she'd been, counting pennies in a failing store, certain her best days were behind her. She thought about the woman she'd become, mother, wife, builder of futures, proof that second chances were real if you were brave enough to take them. And she thought about a crippled boy collapsing in the street, about the choice to kneel down instead of walking past, about how every great thing in her life had flowed from that single moment of choosing compassion over convenience. Mercy, she'd learned, wasn't about grand gestures or dramatic rescues. It was about the daily choice to see people as they were, whole and worthy despite their brokenness, and to offer help without calculating the cost. It was about building families from choice rather than obligation, about creating homes where people could become their best selves instead of their smallest ones. It was about standing on a porch in the desert darkness, surrounded by people you loved, knowing you'd built something that would outlast you. That was worth everything. That was enough.